A piercing scream shatters the opulent silence of the Simplon Orient Express, a luxurious train stranded in a snowdrift. Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, steps into a web of secrets where every passenger hides a motive. Who stabbed the sinister American 12 times in a locked compartment? Why do their alibis crumble like snow? As the truth unravels, a chilling conspiracy linked to a child's tragic death emerges. Will Poirot uphold the law or bend to a deeper justice? Dive into Agatha Christie's masterpiece, where every clue pulls you closer to a shocking revelation. Chapter 1. The tourist express. The air in Aleppo was thick with the scent of dust and spices, a dry heat pressing against Hercule Poirot's neatly pressed suit as he stepped from the sun-baked platform onto the tourist express. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung low, casting long shadows across the station where travelers milled about, merchants barking orders, porters hauling trunks, and passengers clutching tickets with the weary anticipation of a long journey. Poirot adjusted his hat, his mustache twitching as he surveyed the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. His small, fastidious frame moved with purpose, his eyes sharp green, and impossibly alert, taking in every detail: the frayed cuff of a porter's sleeve, the nervous glance of a woman in a veiled hat, the faint smudge of ink on a man's fingers as he fumbled with his passport. Poirot had just concluded a case in Syria, a delicate matter involving a stolen artifact and a diplomat's indiscretions, and now he sought the comfort of the Orient Express, the pinnacle of luxury travel, to carry him back to Europe. The tourist express, a more modest precursor, would ferry him to Istanbul, where the grand train awaited. He stepped aboard, his polished shoes clicking on the metal steps, and was greeted by a conductor whose uniform gleamed with brass buttons. Though Poirot noted one was slightly misaligned, a detail that, to him, was as jarring as a misplaced note in a symphony. "Beknown, Monsieur Poirot," the conductor said, his French accented but polite. "Your compartment is ready." "Merci," Poirot replied, his voice smooth, almost musical, as he handed over his ticket. He followed the conductor through the narrow corridor, the train's interior a blend of polished wood and plush red upholstery, though less opulent than the Orient Express he anticipated. The carriage hummed with the low murmur of passengers, settling in, their voices a tapestry of languages: French, English, Arabic, and something guttural Poirot identified as Hungarian. He catalogued them instinctively, his mind a filing cabinet of human behavior. His compartment was small but immaculate, with a single berth, a fold-down table, and a window framing the fading Syrian landscape. Poirot placed his suitcase, a compact, leather-bound affair, on the rack, ensuring it was perfectly aligned. He sat, smoothing his trousers, and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The case in Syria had been solved with his usual elegance, and now a journey of leisure lay ahead, or so he thought. The train lurched forward, its whistle piercing the air, and Poirot leaned toward the window. The platform receded, replaced by a blur of ochre hills and scattered olive trees. He opened a small notebook, its pages crisp, and began jotting observations, a habit as natural to him as breathing. The woman in the veiled hat, he noted, had lingered too long near the ticket counter, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. The man with the inky fingers had boarded with a briefcase clutched too tightly, as if it held secrets rather than documents. Poirot's pen paused. Secrets, he mused, were the currency of travel. Everyone carried them, but not all were harmless. The dining car, when he entered for dinner, was a study in contrasts. The tables were set with crisp linens and silver cutlery, but the passengers themselves were a motley assembly. At one table sat a Russian princess, her silver hair piled high, her fur stole draped over her shoulders despite the warmth. Her name, Poirot learned from the conductor, was Princess Natalia Dragomirov, a woman whose sharp eyes belied her age. Across from her was a young Englishwoman, Mary Debenham, her posture rigid, her governess's attire severe yet elegant. She spoke little, her gaze fixed on her plate, though Poirot caught her stealing glances at a man 2 tables away, a tall, broad-shouldered Englishman with a military bearing, later introduced as Colonel Arbuthnot. At the table nearest Poirot sat an American, Samuel Ratchet, whose loud voice and brash manner dominated the car. His suit was expensive but ill-fitting, his tie a garish shade of red. He laughed too loudly at his own jokes, his small eyes darting about as if expecting trouble. His companion, a nervous young secretary named Hector McQueen, nodded along, his fingers drumming on the table. Poirot, sipping a glass of Burgundy, observed them all, his mind weaving connections. The princess's disdainful glance at Ratchet, Mary Debenham's fleeting look of recognition toward Arbuthnot, McQueen's anxious fidgeting. Something was amiss, though Poirot could not yet name it. After dinner, as the train rattled through the Turkish countryside, Poirot lingered in the corridor, ostensibly to stretch his legs. The air was cooler now, the windows cracked to let in a breeze. He passed Ratchet's compartment and overheard a fragment of conversation through the partially opened door. "It's not right." A voice: McQueen's. Poirot. "Justice should have been served years ago." "Quiet," Ratchet snapped, his tone sharp. "No one here knows. Keep it that way." Poirot's mustache twitched. Justice, a curious word. heavy with implication. He moved on, pausing near Mary Debenham's compartment, where he heard her speaking softly to someone Arbuthnot. "Perhaps we can't change it now," she said, her voice strained. "It's done." Poirot filed the words away. His curiosity piqued but his demeanor unruffled. He returned to his compartment, the train's rhythm lulling him into a state of calm. Night fell. The Tourist Express pressed on, its lights cutting through the darkness. Poirot lay in his berth, the notebook open beside him. He reviewed his observations. The veiled woman, now identified as Mrs. Hubbard, an American widow with a penchant for dramatics. The inky-fingered man, a Hungarian diplomat named Count Andronier, and Ratchet, whose unease suggested a man running from his past. The word justice echoed in Poirot's mind, a clue yet to be deciphered. He closed the notebook, satisfied with the day's insights, and extinguished the light. The train's gentle sway carried him toward sleep, but not before he noted one final detail, the faint sound of footsteps outside his door, pausing then retreating into the night. The journey had begun, and with it, a puzzle that would test even Hercule Poirot's formidable intellect. The stars were bright above the Turkish plains, their light filtering through the compartment's window as Poirot drifted into a light sleep. The train's rhythm was steady, a metronome of steel and steam, but his mind remained active, turning over the faces and voices of his fellow passengers. The Tourist Express was more than a mode of transport. It was a microcosm of humanity, each passenger a piece in a mosaic Poirot had yet to fully assemble. He sensed, with the instinct honed by years of unraveling mysteries, that this journey would be anything but ordinary. Morning brought a change in scenery. The arid hills giving way to the greener slopes approaching Istanbul. Poirot rose early, his routine meticulous, a shave with a straight razor, a precise adjustment of his tie, a quick polish of his shoes. He emerged into the corridor where the conductor, Pierre Michel, was already at work, his face pale but composed. "A good morning, monsieur," Michel said, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Poirot nodded, noting the man's clenched hands. Another detail, another thread, on the dining car. Breakfast was a quieter affair. The princess sat alone, her fingers tracing the rim of a teacup, her expression unreadable. Mary Debenham and Colonel Arbuthnot were at separate tables, their earlier connection now carefully concealed. Ratchet, however, was absent, his secretary, McQueen, explaining that his employer was feeling unwell. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Illness or avoidance? He sipped his coffee, its bitterness a perfect complement to his thoughts. The train slowed as it neared Haydarpaka Station, Istanbul's gateway to the Orient Express. Passengers began to gather their belongings, their voices rising with the excitement of arrival. Poirot, however, lingered, his gaze sweeping the car. Mrs. Hubbard, now sans veil, was fussing over a lost glove, her voice carrying a theatrical edge. Count Androni and his young wife, a striking woman with dark eyes, exchanged quiet words in Hungarian. A Swedish missionary, Greta Olsen, clutched a Bible, her lips moving in silent prayer. Each passenger, Poirot noted, seemed to carry a private burden, their interactions laced with an undercurrent of tension. As the train pulled into the station, Poirot stepped onto the platform, the bustle of Istanbul enveloping him. Porters shouted, vendors hawked tea and simit, and the air was alive with the scent of the Bosphorus. He glanced back at the Tourist Express, its cars gleaming in the morning light. The journey to this point had been a prelude, a gathering of players in a drama yet to unfold. He would board the Simplon Orient Express that evening, and with it, he suspected, the true mystery would begin. Poirot adjusted his hat, his mustache curving slightly as he smiled to himself. The puzzle was forming, its pieces scattered but within reach. He was content, for now, with the knowledge that his little gray cells were already at work, sorting, analyzing, preparing. The Orient Express awaited, and with it, a journey that would challenge his intellect and his heart. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, a pause before the next act. The game, as always, was afoot. Chapter 2. The American Secret. The Simplon Orient Express glided through the twilight, its polished wood paneling and gleaming brass fixtures reflecting the soft glow of the dining car chandeliers. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his mustache waxed to perfection, sat at a small table near the center of the car. The clink of crystal and the murmur of conversation filled the air, a symphony of elegance that matched the train's reputation as a palace on wheels. Yet, beneath the veneer of civility, Poirot's sharp eyes caught flickers of tension. A glanced along, a hand too quick to hide a gesture, a laugh too forced. He sipped his wine, a fine Bordeaux, and observed the passengers with the precision of a watchmaker. At the table to his left sat Samuel Ratchet, the American businessman whose brash voice had already grated on Poirot's nerves during the journey from Istanbul. Ratchet was a man of middle age, with a square jaw and eyes that darted like a cornered animal's. His suit, though expensive, seemed ill-fitted, as if he wore wealth as a costume rather than a birthright. He was dining alone, save for the occasional interruption by his valet, a quiet man named Masterman, who moved with the unobtrusive efficiency of a shadow. Ratchet's conversation, overheard by Poirot, was a mix of boasts about his business ventures and vague complaints about troubles following him from America. The word troubles piqued Poirot's interest, though he filed it away for later consideration. Across the car, the Russian princess Natalia Dragomirov held court with her imperious presence, a fur stole draped over her shoulders like a royal mantle, and her sharp aristocratic features commanded attention. She spoke in low tones to her companion, a young German maid named Hildegard Schmidt, who nodded deferentially at every word. Poirot noted the princess's hand, with age but adorned with rings that caught the light like stars. There was a story in those hands, he thought, one of power and perhaps pain. At another table, the English governess, Mary Debenham, sat with Colonel Arbuthnot, a tall, lean man with a soldier's bearing and a clipped manner of speech. Their conversation was polite but guarded, as if each word were chosen with care. Poirot caught a fleeting look between them, a spark of something deeper than casual acquaintance. He wondered if it was romance or conspiracy that bound them. The dining car was a microcosm of the world, he mused, where strangers were forced into proximity, their secrets brushing against one another like the edges of a puzzle. The meal progressed with the precision of a well-rehearsed play. Waiters glided between tables, delivering plates of coq au vin and delicate pastries. Poirot savored his meal, but his mind was elsewhere, cataloguing the passengers' behaviors. There was Mrs. Hubbard, the American widow, whose loud complaints about the draft in her compartment drew sympathetic nods from her neighbors. There was the young Swedish missionary, Greta Olsen, whose earnest demeanor contrasted with her nervous fidgeting. And there was the Italian, Antonio Foscarelli, a car salesman whose animated gestures and quick smiles seemed almost too charming, as if designed to distract. As dessert was served, a delicate lemon tart, Ratchet rose from his table and approached Poirot. The movement was abrupt, drawing eyes from nearby diners. Ratchet's smile was wide but did not reach his eyes, which held a glint of desperation. He leaned in, his voice low but urgent. "Monsieur Poirot, I've heard you're the best detective in Europe," he began, his American accent thick and unpolished. "I need your help. I'm in a spot of trouble, and I'd like to hire you." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his expression polite but cool. "Trouble, monsieur, of what nature?" Ratchet hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting an eavesdrop. "I've got enemies," he said, his voice dropping further. "People who want to do me harm. I need protection, and I'm willing to pay handsomely for it. Name your price." Poirot set down his fork, his gaze fixed on Ratchet. There was something in the man's demeanor, a mix of arrogance and fear, that set Poirot's instincts on edge. "I am not a bodyguard, Monsieur Ratchet," he replied, his tone measured. "I am a detective. My services are for solving crimes, not preventing them." Ratchet's smile faltered, but he pressed on. "You don't understand. I'm talking real danger here. I've got letters, threats. They know where I am." He reached into his jacket pocket, producing a folded piece of paper. As he did, another paper slipped out, fluttering to the floor. Poirot's eyes caught the glint of a monogram on it, stylized C in red ink, before Ratchet hastily retrieved it. "Letters, you say?" Poirot asked, his curiosity piqued by the fallen paper. "May I see them?" Ratchet hesitated, then handed over the folded note. It was written in a neat, precise hand. "You cannot run forever. Justice will find you." The words were chilling in their simplicity, and Poirot felt a familiar thrill, the first thread of a mystery unraveling. "I thank you for your confidence," Monsieur Poirot said, returning the note. "But I must decline. I do not take cases based on vague fears, and I sense there is more to your story than you are willing to share." Ratchet's face darkened, a flash of anger crossing his features. "You're making a mistake, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "You'll regret this." Poirot met his gaze, unflinching. "Perhaps, monsieur, but my conscience is clear." Ratchet turned abruptly and returned to his table, his movements stiff with frustration. Poirot watched him go, noting the way the other passengers avoided his eyes, as if Ratchet were a storm cloud passing through their midst. The dining car resumed its hum of conversation, but the air felt heavier, charged with unspoken questions. Thus Poirot finished his dessert. He reflected on Ratchet's words: enemies, threats, justice. The man was clearly hiding something, and the monogrammed paper suggested a connection to someone or something specific. Poirot's mind began to weave a tapestry of possibilities, each thread leading to a question. Who was Ratchet, really, and why did he fear for his life? The waiter cleared Poirot's plate, and he rose, adjusting his tie. He made his way back to his compartment, the train's gentle sway a soothing counterpoint to the churn of his thoughts. The corridor was quiet, save for the soft creak of the train and the distant clatter of dishes from the dining car. As he passed Ratchet's compartment, he paused, his eyes lingering on the door. The number compartment 2 was etched in brass, gleaming under the corridor's lights. Something about the door felt wrong, though he could not place why. A shadow, a sound. He shook his head, dismissing the thought as fatigued in his own compartment. Poirot settled into his berth, the crisp linens cool against his skin. He opened his notebook, a small leather-bound volume he always carried, and jotted down his observations. Ratchet American, anxious, possible alias, threatening letter, monogram C. Passengers' connections, unknown but present, unease, palpable. He closed the notebook, satisfied with his initial impressions. The train's rhythm lulled him, its wheels singing a song of motion and mystery. But sleep did not come easily. The word justice from Ratchet's letter echoed in his mind, intertwined with the cryptic conversation he had overheard on the platform in Istanbul. Two voices, one male, one female, speaking in hushed tones. It must be done for justice. He had thought little of it at the time, but now it felt significant. A piece of the puzzle he could not yet place. The train sped through the night, its lights cutting through the darkness of the Turkish countryside. Poirot lay awake, his mind a kaleidoscope of faces and motives. The American's secret, whatever it was the key to the unease that permeated the Orient Express. And Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, knew that the secret would not remain hidden for long. As the hours passed, the train's hum became a backdrop to his thoughts. He considered the passengers again, each a potential player in the drama unfolding around him. The princess, with her regal air and hidden strength. The governess, whose calm exterior masked a fire within. The colonel, whose military precision could conceal a darker purpose. Even the conductor, Pierre Michel, whose deference seemed tinged with something unspoken. They were all pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot was determined to fit them together. He thought of Ratchet's offer, the desperation in his eyes. Money was no temptation for Poirot. His currency was truth, but the man's fear was genuine, and that intrigued him. What could inspire such terror in a man who carried himself with such bravado? And what was the significance of the monogrammed paper? The letter C suggested a name, an organization, or perhaps a code. Poirot's mind raced through possibilities, each more tantalizing than the last. The train slowed briefly, likely passing through a small station, and Poirot glanced out his window. The night was impenetrably dark, save for the occasional flicker of a distant light. He felt a pang of isolation, not for himself, but for the train itself, world unto itself, hurtling through the void with its cargo of secrets. He closed his eyes, willing sleep to come, but his thoughts returned to Ratchet. The man was a cipher, his fear a beacon drawing Poirot's attention. As he drifted towards sleep, Poirot's last thought was of the dining car, its elegance a stark contrast to the undercurrent of dread that had settled over the passengers. He was content, for now, with his decision to decline Ratchet's offer, but he knew, with the certainty of a man who had solved countless mysteries, that the American's secret would soon demand his attention. The train's wheels sang on, carrying Poirot and the Orient Express deeper into the night, and deeper into the heart of a mystery that would soon unravel. The hours passed in a blur of half-sleep, Poirot's mind flickering between dreams and deductions. He saw Ratchet's face, the monogrammed paper, the cryptic note. He saw the passengers, their faces shifting like cards in a deck, each hiding a truth. And he saw the train itself, a gleaming serpent winding through the darkness, its destination known but its journey fraught with peril. When he awoke, it was to the sound of the train's whistle, a mournful cry that seemed to echo the unease in his heart. He rose, straightened his tie, and prepared to face the day. The American's secret was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and Hercule Poirot was ready to find it. The corridor outside his compartment was quiet, the passengers still in their berths. He stepped out, his eyes scanning the doors, lingering again on compartment 2. The brass number gleamed, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets. Poirot's hand brushed the doorframe and he felt a shiver, not of cold but of anticipation. The mystery was only beginning, and he was in his element. He returned to his compartment, his notebook open once more. He added a single line: "The secret is the key. Find the secret, find the truth." Then he closed the book, his mind clear, his purpose set. The Simplon Orient Express was more than a train now, it was a stage, and Poirot was its director, ready to uncover the drama hidden within its walls. As the train sped on, Poirot felt a quiet satisfaction. The pieces were in place, the players assembled. The American's secret would not remain a secret for long, and when it was revealed, Poirot knew the Orient Express would never be the same. Chapter 3. The midnight scream. The Simplon Orient Express thundered through the night, its rhythmic clatter a lullaby to most of its passengers, cocooned in the luxury of their velvet-draped compartments. Hercule Poirot, however, lay awake in his berth, his mind restless despite the late hour. The Belgian detective, famed for his meticulous habits and unerring instincts, had retired after a sumptuous dinner in the dining car, but sleep eluded him. The cryptic conversation he had overheard earlier, murmured exchange about justice between two shadowy figures in the corridor, lingered in his thoughts, teasing the edges of his curiosity. He adjusted his silk nightcap, propped himself against the plush pillow, and stared at the polished mahogany ceiling of his first-class compartment, willing his mind to quiet. It was then at precisely 1:23 a.m. that a scream shattered the stillness. It was a sound raw and primal, cutting through the hum of the train like a blade. Poirot sat bolt upright, his heart quickening not from fear but from the sudden certainty that something was amiss. The scream had come from nearby, perhaps 2 or 3 compartments down the Calais coach, where the most prominent passengers were housed. He waited, ears straining, but no further sound. Followed only the steady churn of the train's wheels and the faint creak of woodwork settling in the cold. Poirot slipped from his bed, his movements precise despite the hour. He donned a burgundy dressing gown, its gold embroidery glinting faintly in the dim light of his reading lamp, and stepped into his polished slippers. Opening his compartment door, he peered into the corridor, where the soft glow of wall sconces cast long shadows. The air was thick with the scent of polished brass and starched linen, but there was something else, a faint undercurrent of tension, as if the train itself held its breath. To his left, the corridor was empty, stretching toward the dining car. To his right, a figure emerged from the shadows, Pierre Michel, the conductor, his face pale and his uniform slightly askew, as though he had been roused from sleep. The man's eyes darted nervously, and Poirot noted the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted his cap. "Monsieur Poirot," Michel said, his voice low but urgent, "did you hear it? The scream?" "Oui, Monsieur," Michel Poirot replied, his tone calm but his grey eyes sharp. "It was most distinct. From which direction did it come?" Michel hesitated, glancing toward the compartment numbered 2, where Samuel Ratchet, the American businessman, was lodged. "I believe it was from there, Monsieur, but I cannot be certain. I was in the service area when I heard it." Poirot nodded, his mind already cataloguing details: the conductor's unease, the precise location of the scream, the hour. "Let us investigate," he said, gesturing toward the compartment. As they moved, another door slid open with a soft thud, revealing Mary Debenham, the English governess. Her dark hair was slightly disheveled, and her grey eyes were wide with alarm, though she quickly composed herself. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "What was that dreadful noise? It woke me." Poirot studied her for a moment. Miss Debenham's composure was admirable, but there was a flicker of something, fear perhaps, or guilt in her expression. "A scream, mademoiselle," he replied. "We are about to ascertain its cause. Pray, remain in your compartment for now." She nodded, though her gaze lingered on the door to Ratchet's compartment before she retreated. Poirot and Michel reached compartment 2, and the conductor knocked sharply. "Monsieur Ratchet, are you well?" There was no response. Michel knocked again, louder this time, but the silence persisted. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Open the door, Monsieur Michel," he said softly. The conductor fumbled with his master key, his hand still unsteady. The lock clicked, and the door slid open to reveal a dimly lit compartment. Samuel Ratchet stood at the window, his back to them, staring out at the passing darkness. He turned slowly, his face flushed and his eyes bloodshot, as though he had been drinking or worse. "It was nothing," Ratchet said brusquely, his American accent thick with irritation. "A nightmare. I must have shouted in my sleep. No need for all this fuss." Poirot's gaze swept the compartment, taking in every detail: the rumpled bed, the half-empty glass of bourbon on the bedside table, the faint smell of tobacco lingering in the air. And there, on the floor near the door, something caught his eye, a small, gleaming object. He bent down, careful not to draw attention, and retrieved it: a brass button, embossed with the crest of the Wagonlits Company, identical to those on Michel's uniform. Yet Michel's jacket was intact, every button accounted for. "Very well, Monsieur Ratchet," Poirot said, his voice smooth as he pocketed the button discreetly. "We apologize for the intrusion. A scream in the night is cause for concern, n'est-ce pas? But if it was merely a dream, we shall leave you to your rest." Ratchet grunted, waving them off. "Yeah, just a dream. Good night." Michel closed the door, and Poirot turned to him. "Tell me, Monsieur Michel, have you lost a button from your uniform recently?" The conductor blinked, startled, and glanced down at his jacket. "No, monsieur, all are present." "Why do you ask?" Poirot smiled faintly, his mustache twitching. "A small observation, nothing more. Return to your duties, but remain vigilant. I sense this night is not yet done with its surprises." As Michel nodded and retreated, Poirot lingered in the corridor, his mind racing. The button was an anomaly, a clue that did not fit the neat narrative of a nightmare. He resolved to begin his inquiries at once, for if there was one thing Hercule Poirot knew, it was that the truth hid in the smallest details. He returned to his compartment only long enough to retrieve his notebook, a slim leather-bound volume where he recorded his observations. Then, with the train's gentle sway beneath his feet, he began his rounds, knocking softly on each door. The passengers, roused by the scream or already awake, were a study in contrasts. Princess Dragomirov, the elderly Russian aristocrat, answered in a silk robe, her imperious demeanor unshaken by the hour. "A scream," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I heard nothing. These walls are thin, but my sleep is not so easily disturbed." Colonel Arbuthnot, the stiff-backed British officer, was more forthcoming, though his answers were clipped. "Heard it. Yes. Thought it was a woman at first, but I couldn't say. Stayed in my compartment, as one does." His eyes, however, flicked toward Mary Debenham's door, a gesture Poirot noted with interest. Mrs. Hubbard, the talkative American widow, was a whirlwind of nervous energy. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, it was dreadful. I heard that scream, and I swear I saw someone in my compartment earlier, a shadow, moving past my curtain. I'm not safe here, not at all." Her theatrics were convincing, but Poirot's keen eye caught the absence of any disturbance in her neatly arranged belongings. Each passenger offered a piece of the puzzle, their stories weaving a tapestry of half-truths and deflections. Hungarian Count and Countess Andronier, elegant and reserved, claimed to have slept through the noise. The Italian salesman Antonio Foscarelli was effusive, gesturing wildly as he described hearing a cry, like a wounded animal. The Swedish missionary Greta Olsen clutched her Bible and whispered of evil spirits aboard the train. As Poirot moved from compartment to compartment, he catalogued their responses, his pencil scratching notes in his meticulous shorthand. He noted their attire. Most were in nightclothes, but some, like Mary Debenham, were partially dressed, as if they had not yet retired. He noted their expressions, some fearful, some guarded, some too composed for the hour. And he noted the absence of the button's owner, for no conductor's uniform was missing its brass adornment. The train's rhythm had resumed its hypnotic cadence, but Poirot's mind was far from lulled. He returned to his compartment, settling into the armchair by his window. The moonlit landscape outside was a blur of silver and shadow, the Balkan hills rolling past like silent witnesses. He opened his notebook and began to sketch a diagram of the Calais coach, marking each passenger's compartment and the location of the scream. Compartment 2, Ratchet's, was central, flanked by Mrs. Hubbard on one side, and the empty compartment reserved for the train's director, Monsieur Book, on the other. The button troubled him. It was too deliberate, too out of place to be accidental. Had it been dropped by someone posing as a conductor? Or was it a plant meant to mislead? Poirot's fingers traced the embossed crest, his mind turning over possibilities. Ratchet's dismissal of the scream as a nightmare felt rehearsed, and his nervous demeanor at dinner, the way his eyes darted to every corner of the dining car, suggested a man who knew he was hunted. Poirot leaned back, closing his eyes. The scream had been no dream. Of that, he was certain. It had been a cry of fear, perhaps of pain, and it had come from a man who carried secrets heavy enough to warrant such a sound. The detective's thoughts drifted to the conversation he had overheard in Istanbul, the word justice spoken with a weight that implied more than casual discussion. Was Ratchet the target of that justice? And if so, who among this eclectic group of passengers was its agent? He rose, lighting a small cigarette, a rare indulgence, reserved for moments of deep contemplation. The smoke curled upward, mingling with the faint glow of the sconces. Poirot's method was to let the clues speak, to allow the little gray cells of his mind to arrange them into a pattern. The button, the scream, the passengers' guarded responses. They were threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. He would begin with Ratchet, whose fear was the key to unlocking this mystery, as the train hurtled toward its next stop. Now hours delayed by a creeping snowstorm in the mountains, Poirot felt a familiar thrill. The case was taking shape, its contours emerging like a sculpture from marble. He extinguished his cigarette, tucked his notebook away, and adjusted his nightcap. The night was far from over, and Hercule Poirot was content to let it unfold, knowing that the truth, like the Orient Express itself, would arrive at its destination in due time. The hours passed, and Poirot's inquiries continued, each conversation adding a layer to the enigma. He spoke again with Pierre Michel, who revealed a detail that had escaped earlier mention. A woman's voice, faint but distinct, had called out shortly after the scream, though Michel could not pinpoint its source. "It was muffled, monsieur," he said, his brow creased. "Perhaps from the next coach, but I cannot be sure." Poirot pressed him gently. "In this voice, what did it say?" Michel hesitated, his eyes flickering with unease. "It sounded like, not now, but I may have misheard. The train, it makes many noises." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. A woman's voice, a cryptic phrase, another thread to weave. He moved on to the dining car, now deserted save for a lone waiter polishing silverware. The man, a young Italian named Antonio, confirmed hearing the scream but claimed to have been too busy to investigate. His hands, Poirot noted, were steady, but his eyes avoided contact, as if hiding something beneath his practiced smile. The detective's next stop was the compartment of Hector McQueen, Ratchet's young American secretary. McQueen was awake, reading a tattered copy of The Great Gatsby, his glasses perched low on his nose. He admitted to hearing the scream but insisted he had stayed in his berth, unwilling to involve himself in Ratchet's dramas. When Poirot probed about his employer's past, McQueen's answers grew vague, his fingers tapping nervously on the book's cover. "He's a private man, Monsieur Poirot," McQueen said. "Keeps his business to himself. I just handle his correspondence, book his travel, that's all." Poirot smiled, his eyes gleaming. "And yet, Monsieur McQueen, you seem troubled. Is there something about Monsieur Ratchet you wish to share?" The young man's face tightened, but he shook his head. "Nothing to tell. He's complicated, that's all. Complicated." The word hung in the air as Poirot took his leave, his mind turning over McQueen's hesitation. The secretary knew more than he let on, and Poirot resolved to revisit him later, when the pressure of the investigation might loosen his tongue. As dawn approached, the train slowed its progress. Hampered by the thickening snow, Poirot returned to his compartment, his notebook now filled with observations. The button, the scream, the woman's voice, the passenger's alibis, Ratchet's fear. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of the train lull him into a state of focused calm. The little gray cells were at work, sorting, arranging, seeking the pattern that would reveal the truth. The scream had been the catalyst, the spark that ignited this mystery. It was no nightmare, no accident. It was a signal, a warning, a cry from the heart of a man marked for death. And Poirot, with his unerring sense of justice, would follow that cry to its source, no matter how deep the snow, how dark the night, or how cunning the minds that sought to conceal it. He opened his eyes, his resolve firm. The Orient Express was a microcosm, a world unto itself, and within its opulent walls, a crime was brewing. Poirot was content, for now, with his initial observations, but he knew the path ahead would be fraught with deception. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, casting a pale glow on the snow-covered mountains, he murmured to himself, "The truth, it is like the snow. It covers all, but it cannot hide forever." And with that, Hercule Poirot settled back, ready for the next act in this unfolding drama, his mind as sharp as the winter air outside. Chapter 4. The body and compartment to the Simplon Orient Express, halted by a snowdrift in the early hours of a Balkan winter, stood motionless under a sky heavy with gray. Inside, the opulence of its mahogany-paneled corridors and velvet windows seemed to mock the chaos that had erupted within its confines. Hercule Poirot, roused from his fitful sleep by the urgent knocking of Monsieur Book, the director of the Compagnie Internationale des Wagonslits, stepped into the corridor, with a calm that belied the storm brewing aboard the train. His small, precise steps echoed faintly as he followed Book toward compartment 2, where a tragedy had unfolded. The air in the corridor was thick with the scent of polished wood, and the faint metallic tang of something far more sinister. Book, his round face pale and his mustache quivering, gestured toward the door of compartment 2. "It's Ratchet," he whispered, his voice barely steady. "He's dead, Poirot. Murdered." Poirot's dark eyes gleamed with a flicker of curiosity, though his expression remained impassive. "Murdered, you say," he replied, his Belgian accent crisp. "Then we must see for ourselves. Mon ami, lead the way." The door to compartment 2 was ajar, guarded by Pierre Michel, the conductor, whose usually impeccable uniform was slightly askew. His eyes darted nervously as he stepped aside for Poirot and Book. Inside, the scene was one of controlled chaos. The compartment, though compact, was a study in luxury plush upholstery, a small wash basin with a gleaming mirror, a narrow bed neatly made. Or it had been, until the violence that had taken place within its walls. Samuel Ratchet lay sprawled across the bed, his body twisted in an unnatural pose. His silk pajamas, once a pristine cream, were now stained with dark, glistening patches of blood. His face, frozen in a grimace of shock, stared blankly at the ceiling. The air was heavy with the coppery scent of blood, mingling with the faint perfume of the man's cologne. Poirot's gaze swept the room, cataloguing every detail. The window slightly open despite the freezing temperature outside. A glass of water on the bedside table, untouched. A crumpled piece of paper clutched in Ratchet's stiffening fingers. "Mon Dieu," Book muttered, crossing himself. "What a horror." Poirot, unmoved by the gore, stepped closer, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. "A horror, yes," he said softly, "but also a puzzle. And puzzles, Monsieur Book, are meant to be solved." He knelt beside the body, his movements deliberate. The wounds on Ratchet's body were numerous, 12 he counted, though he would confirm later. Each stab was precise, yet they varied in depth and angle. Some were shallow, hesitant, as if delivered by an unsteady hand. Others were deep, driven with force. The pattern intrigued Poirot. "Curio," he murmured, "very curious indeed." Book hovered anxiously. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" "A maniac, a robbery gone wrong." Poirot's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles. "A maniac, perhaps, but not without method. As for robbery—" He glanced around the compartment. Ratchet's gold pocket watch lay on the table, its chain glinting in the lamplight. A leather wallet, stuffed with banknotes, sat untouched beside it. No, not robbery. This was personal. He turned his attention to the crumpled paper in Ratchet's hand. With care, he pried it free, smoothing it out. The words were scrawled, in hasty, uneven script, "Daisy Armstrong." Poirot's brow furrowed. The name stirred a memory, distant but sharp, a tragedy from years past, a case that had shaken the world. He tucked the paper into his pocket, his mind already racing. "Pierre," Poirot called to the conductor who lingered in the doorway. "Who has been in this compartment since the body was discovered?" Pierre Michel's face was ashen. "Only myself, monsieur, and Dr. Constantine. He's a passenger, but he offered to examine the body. He's waiting in the dining car." Poirot nodded. Good. And when was the body found? Just after dawn, Pierre replied. I knocked to wake Monsieur Ratchet, as he requested, but there was no answer. I used my key and found him like this. And you saw no one else in the corridor last night? After the scream we all heard, Pierre hesitated, his fingers twisting the edge of his sleeve. No one, monsieur, but it was dark, and I was in my own compartment for much of the night. Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. He turned back to the body, examining the wounds again. The variation in their execution suggested more than one assailant. Yet the locked door and the snowbound train presented a conundrum. How had the murderer or murderers escaped? The open window caught his eye again. He leaned closer, inspecting the frame. A faint smudge of grease marked the latch, barely noticeable. Interesting, he said under his breath. Book-rowing. Impatient, paced the small space. What now, Poirot? The passengers are restless. The demanding answers, and the train is stuck in this wretched snow. Poirot straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his gloves. Now, mon ami, we investigate. We speak to the passengers, we examine their stories, and we uncover the truth. But first, I must see Dr. Constantine. The dining car, usually a haven of clinking crystal and murmured conversation, was now a stage for barely concealed tension. Passengers sat in clusters, their faces a mix of shock, fear, and curiosity. Mary Debenham, the English governess, sat alone, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the window as if willing the snow to melt. Princess Dragomirov, swathed in furs, sipped tea with an air of regal detachment. Mrs. Hubbard, the American widow, was speaking loudly to anyone who would listen, her voice shrill with indignation. A murderer on this train, she exclaimed, clutching her shawl. I said there was someone in my compartment last night, and now look what's happened. Poirot, entering with book, raised a hand for silence. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice carrying a quiet authority that stilled the room. A tragedy has occurred. Monsieur Ratchet has been murdered. I, Hercule Poirot, will undertake the investigation. I ask for your cooperation and your patience. A murmur rippled through the group, but no one protested. Poirot's reputation preceded him, and his presence was a strange comfort in the midst of chaos. He gestured to Dr. Constantine, a Greek physician with a neat beard and a calm demeanor, who rose from his seat. Dr. Poirot said, your observations, if you please. Constantine cleared his throat. The man was stabbed 12 times. Monsieur Poirot's death occurred between midnight and 2 in the morning, based on the body's temperature and rigor mortis. The wounds, some are superficial, others deep. One, in particular, was delivered with such force it pierced the heart. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the details. And the time of death, can you be more precise? Constantine hesitated. Not without further examination, but I would estimate closer to 1 o'clock. Thank you, Doctor. Poirot turned to the passengers, his gaze sweeping over them like a searchlight. I will speak with each of you in turn. For now, remain here, and do not leave the dining car without my permission. As he moved to leave, Mrs. Hubbard's voice cut through the air. Monsieur Poirot, I insist you investigate my compartment. I'm telling you, there was someone there last night. A man, I'm sure of it. Poirot inclined his head. Your concern is noted. Madame will inspect all compartments in due course. He and Book retreated to the corridor where Poirot's expression grew pensive. This case, Monsieur Book, is not simple. The wounds, the locked door, the note. It is a pattern, but it eludes me for now. Book wrung his hands. What do we do, Poirot? The passengers are frightened, and the authorities are days away with this snow. Poirot's eyes gleamed. We use the time we have. We observe. We question. We think. The truth is here, on this train, among these people, and Hercule Poirot will find it. The investigation began in earnest. Poirot returned to compartment 2, this time with Dr. Constantine in tow, to conduct a more thorough examination. The window, he noted, was not just open but stuck, the latch bent as if forced. He ran a gloved finger along the sill, finding another trace of grease. Someone has tampered with this, he said, more to himself than to Constantine. But why? To suggest an escape that never happened. He turned to the bed, where Ratchet's body still lay. The bloodstains had darkened, and the air was growing colder as the train's heating struggled against the snow. Poirot examined the wounds again, noting their placement: chest, abdomen, shoulder. The stabs are not random, he said. They tell a story. Some are angry, some are hesitant. It is as if the murderer or murderers were acting out a ritual. Constantine raised an eyebrow. Murderers? You think more than one person did this? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. It is a possibility. Doctor, the evidence suggests it, but we must not jump to conclusions. We must build the case, piece by piece. Next, Poirot inspected the compartment's contents. The bedside table held a glass of water, a bottle of sleeping pills, and a small book of poetry. Its pages the wardrobe contained Ratchet's clothes, expensive suits, silk ties, a pair of polished shoes. But it was the small suitcase under the bed that caught Poirot's attention. He opened it carefully, revealing a collection of letters, a photograph, and a single glove, its mate missing. The photograph was charred at the edges, but the image was clear. A young girl, no more than 3, smiling at the camera. Poirot's heart tightened. Daisy Armstrong. The letters were a mix of business correspondence and personal notes, but one stood out, a single sheet, folded tightly, with the same monogram he had seen in the dining car the night before. It was addressed to Ratchet, but the signature was illegible. The words were a warning. You cannot escape what you have done. Poirot slipped the letter into his pocket alongside the note from Ratchet's hand. These are not the belongings of an innocent man, Poirot said softly, but are they enough to justify murder? Constantine, watching him, shook his head. You speak as if you already know the answer, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's eyes twinkled. I know only that the truth is a mosaic, and I have found but a few tiles. Come, let us return to the dining car. The passengers were growing restless, their conversations a low hum of anxiety. Poirot began his interviews, starting with Mary Debenham. She sat upright, her face composed but her eyes wary. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steady. I heard the scream last night, as I told you, but I saw nothing, I swear. Poirot leaned forward, his hands folded. And yet, mademoiselle, you were in the corridor when I emerged from my compartment. What brought you there? She hesitated, her fingers tightening on her handbag. I couldn't sleep. The train's motion, the cold, it unsettled me. Poirot nodded, but his eyes lingered on her. And you saw no one else? No one at all? No one, she said firmly, but her gaze flickered to the side. Next was Colonel Arbuthnot, a tall, lean Englishman with a military bearing. He admitted to smoking in the corridor late at night, but claimed to have seen nothing unusual. His answers were clipped, precise, but Poirot noted a slight tremor in his hand as he lit a cigarette. Mrs. Hubbard was a whirlwind of nervous energy, insisting again on the mysterious intruder in her compartment. I woke up, and there he was, standing over me, she cried. I screamed, and he ran off. You must believe me, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot listened patiently, his mind noting the inconsistencies. Mrs. Hubbard's compartment was next to Ratchet's, yet no one else had reported seeing a stranger, and the button he had found in the corridor conductor's button did not align with her story. Princess Dragomirov was the last to be questioned in this round. She sat regally, her eyes sharp, despite her age. I knew Ratchet, she admitted, her voice low. Or rather, I knew of him, a despicable man, but I did not kill him. Poirot tilted his head. And yet, madame, you were awake last night, were you not? Your maid mentioned you rang for her at 12:30. The princess's lips curved in a faint smile. You are thorough, Monsieur Poirot. Yes, I was awake. I often am, but I saw nothing of this crime. By the time Poirot finished his initial interviews, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows through the snow-covered windows. The train remained trapped, its passengers a captive audience to the unfolding drama. Poirot retreated to his compartment, spreading his notes across the small table, the button, the grease on the window, the note with Daisy Armstrong's name, the charred photograph. They were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was still unclear. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and let his mind work. The wounds suggested multiple hands, yet the locked door and the snowbound train made an outside intruder unlikely. The passengers' alibis were too neat, too polished, as if rehearsed, and the name Daisy Armstrong, it was the key, he was certain. The tragedy of the Armstrong family was a wound that had not healed, and Ratchet, or Cassetti as he might be, was at its center. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Pierre Michel, his face drawn. Monsieur Poirot, I must tell you something. I lied earlier. I did see someone in the corridor last night after the scream, but I cannot say who it was. It was too dark, and I was afraid. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Afraid, Pierre? Of what? The conductor swallowed. Of what this means. This train, these people. There is something wrong here, monsieur. Something evil. Poirot nodded slowly. You are not wrong, Pierre, but fear not. Hercule Poirot is here, and the truth will not escape me. As Pierre left, Poirot returned to his notes, his mind racing. The case was a labyrinth, but he was no stranger to such challenges. He organized his clues, sketching a rough timeline of the night's events. The scream at midnight, the sightings in the corridor, the discovery of the body at dawn. Each piece fit somewhere, but the whole was still obscured. The snow outside had begun to fall again, blanketing the train in silence. Poirot rose, adjusting his tie, and stepped into the corridor. The investigation would continue, and he would not rest until the truth was laid bare. For now he was content with the complexity of the puzzle, its pieces scattered but within reach. The Orient Express, trapped in the snow, held its secrets tightly, but Hercule Poirot was a man who thrived on unraveling the impossible. Chapter 5. The alibis unraveled. The Simplon Orient Express stood motionless, its luxurious carriages enveloped in a cocoon of snow that had drifted high against the windows, transforming the train into a glittering, isolated world. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the passengers' faces etched with a mix of curiosity and unease as Hercule Poirot began his interviews. The dining car, with its polished mahogany tables and gleaming silverware, had been transformed into an impromptu interrogation room. Poirot sat at the head of a long table, his notebook open, his small, precise hands arranging a pencil and a stack of neatly folded papers. His mustache twitched slightly as he surveyed the passengers, each seated in turn, their alibis poised to be tested against his unrelenting logic. Monsieur Book, the director of the Compagnie Internationale des Wagonslits, what hovered nearby, his round face flushed with anxiety. Mon ami, he whispered to Poirot, this is a delicate matter. These passengers, they are distinguished. Yes, you must tread carefully. Poirot's eyes, sharp as polished obsidian, flicked toward Book. Delicacy, my friend, is a luxury we cannot afford when murder is aboard. Truth is not a guest to be coddled. It must be pursued with vigor. Book sighed, settling into a chair, resigned to Poirot's methods. The first to be interviewed was Princess Natalia Dragomirov, the Russian aristocrat whose presence seemed to command the very air around her. She entered the dining car with the grace of a bygone era, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her fur stole draped over her shoulders despite the warmth of the carriage. Her eyes, pale and piercing, met Poirot's without flinching. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low and resonant, I am at your disposal, though I assure you I have little to offer in this sordid affair. Poirot inclined his head, his tone polite but firm. Madame la Princesse, I seek only the truth. Where were you between the hours of midnight and 2 o'clock this morning, when Monsieur Ratchet met his unfortunate end? The princess's lips curved into a faint, almost amused smile. I was in my compartment, monsieur, as any lady of my years would be at such an hour. My maid, Hildegard Schmidt, can confirm this. I retired after dinner and did not stir until morning. Poirot's pencil scratched softly against his notebook. And you heard nothing unusual? No scream, no footsteps, no disturbance? Nothing, she replied, her voice unwavering. The train is a symphony of sounds, Monsieur Poirot, creaking wood, rattling windows, the hum of the engine. One learns to sleep through it all. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, catching the faintest tremor in her composure, a flicker of her fingers against the edge of her stole. And Monsieur Ratchet, did you know him, perhaps from before this journey? The princess's expression hardened. I did not know the man. He was loud, uncouth, an American with no manners. I kept my distance. Her tone was dismissive, but Poirot noted the precision of her words, as if each had been chosen with care. Merci, Madame, Poirot said, dismissing her with a nod. As she rose, her stole slipped slightly, revealing a delicate silk handkerchief tucked into a sleeve. Poirot's gaze lingered on it, monogrammed and embroidered in gold thread. He made a mental note, his mind already weaving connections. Next came Colonel Arbuthnot, the tall, lean Englishman whose military bearing seemed at odds with the plush surroundings of the dining car. He sat stiffly, his hands clasped on the table, his jaw set. I don't see what use this is, Poirot, he said brusquely. Ratchet was a bounder, and now he's dead. Good riddance, if you ask me. Poirot raised an eyebrow. A strong opinion, Colonel, for a man you claim to have met only on this train. Tell me, where were you at the time of the murder? Arbuthnot's eyes flicked to the side, a brief hesitation. In my compartment, smoking a pipe and reading. I didn't leave until morning, and you heard nothing. Poirot pressed, his voice soft but insistent. A scream, perhaps, or the sound of a struggle. Nothing out of the ordinary, Arbuthnot replied, his tone clipped. The train's noisy enough without adding phantoms to it. Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. And yet, Colonel, I find it curious that your compartment is directly adjacent to Monsieur Ratchet's. Surely, a man of your discipline, trained to notice details, would have heard something. Arbuthnot's jaw tightened. I told you, I heard nothing. If you're implying something, Poirot, spit it out. Poirot smiled faintly, unruffled. I imply nothing, Colonel. I merely seek clarity. Mercy for your time. As Arbuthnot stood, Poirot noticed a faint stain on his cuff, a smudge of what looked like tobacco ash, but darker, almost like ink. Another thread to tug, Poirot thought, as the Colonel strode away. Mrs. Caroline Hubbard, the loquacious American widow, was next, her voice preceding her as she bustled into the dining car clutching a lace handkerchief. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, it's just awful, simply awful. To think there's a murderer among us. I haven't slept a wink since I heard about poor Mr. Ratchet. Her words tumbled out in a rush, her hands fluttering like startled birds. Calm yourself, Madame, Poirot said soothingly. Let us begin with the facts. Where were you last night, between midnight and 2? Mrs. Hubbard's eyes widened. Why, in my compartment, of course, but I'll tell you something, Monsieur Poirot. There was a man in my room, a stranger, I swear it. I woke up around 1 o'clock, and there he was, standing over my bed. I screamed and he bolted out the door. Poirot's expression remained impassive, though his mind was racing. A stranger, you say? Can you describe him? Well, it was dark, she admitted, twisting her handkerchief. But he was tall, I think, and he wore a dark coat. Oh, it was terrifying. And this man, Poirot continued, he entered your compartment, which connects directly to Monsieur Ratchet's. And then what? He vanished into the corridor. Yes, exactly. Mrs. Hubbard nodded vigorously. I locked the door after him, of course, and I didn't dare open it again, until morning. Poirot's pencil paused. And yet, Madame the conductor, Pierre Michel, reports no strangers in the corridor last night. Curious, Nan. His tone was gentle, but his eyes were sharp, watching her closely. Mrs. Hubbard flushed. Well, I might have been half asleep, but I know what I saw, of course, Poirot said, his voice smooth as silk. Merci, Madame, you have been most helpful. As she left, Poirot's gaze fell on the handkerchief she'd left behind on the table. He picked it up, noting its fine lace and the embroidered initials CH, and a faint, almost imperceptible stain that smelled faintly of perfume. Another piece of the puzzle, he thought, tucking it into his pocket. The interviews continued, each passenger offering a carefully crafted alibi. Mary Debenham, the English governess, claimed to have been asleep in her shared compartment with Greta Olsen, the Swedish missionary. Her manner was composed, almost too composed, Poirot noted, her answers precise but lacking warmth. I heard the scream, she admitted, but I thought it was a dream. I didn't leave my compartment. Greta Olsen, in contrast, was a bundle of nerves, her hands trembling as she spoke of her prayers and her horror at the murder. I was with Miss Debenham all night, she insisted, her voice high. We spoke for a while after dinner, then slept. I heard nothing at all. Poirot's questions were relentless, probing for cracks in their stories. He asked about their movements, their interactions with Ratchet, their knowledge of the other passengers. Each response added to his mental tapestry, a complex weave of truth and deception. The valet, Hector McQueen, claimed to have been organizing Ratchet's papers in his own compartment. The Italian, Antonio Fott, swore he'd been smoking in the corridor until late, though no one could corroborate it. The young German maid, Hildegard Schmidt, stammered through her account of attending to Princess Dragomirov, her eyes darting nervously. As the day wore on, Poirot began to notice patterns. The alibis, while individually plausible, seemed to interlocked too neatly, as if rehearsed. The princess's handkerchief, Arbuthnot's stained cuff, Mrs. Hubbard's phantom intruder were threads that didn't quite align. And then there was the button Poirot had found in the corridor the night of the scream, a conductor's button that Pierre Michel swore was not his. It lay in Poirot's pocket now, a small, gleaming clue that refused to fit the narrative. The dining car grew stuffier, the passengers' faces more strained, as Poirot called Pierre Michel forward. The conductor, a wiry man with a perpetually worried expression, stood rigidly, his hands clasped behind his back. Monsieur Poirot, I swear I was at my post all night. I saw nothing unusual, except for the scream, of course. And this button, Poirot held it up, the brass catching the light. It was found near Monsieur Ratchet's compartment, yet you say it is not yours. Michel's face paled. Nan, monsieur, my uniform is complete. Perhaps it was dropped earlier. By another conductor. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone neutral but his eyes unyielding. And you saw no one enter or leave Ratchet's compartment after the scream? No one, Michel insisted, but his voice wavered, and Poirot noted the sweat beading on his forehead. As Michel left, Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. The snow outside had begun to settle, the drifts no longer rising, but the train remained immobilized, a perfect stage for his investigation. He opened his notebook, sketching a timeline of the night's events. The scream at 1:15 a.m., the button in the corridor, Mrs. Hubbard's stranger, the locked compartment, the varied stab wounds on Ratchet's body. Each clue was a note in a discordant symphony, and Poirot was determined to find the melody. He called Dr. Constantine, the Greek physician who had examined Ratchet's body, to confirm the medical details. The wounds, Constantine said, his voice steady, are unusual. 12 stabs, some shallow, some deep. It suggests multiple attackers or perhaps one with varying strength or varying intent, Poirot murmured, his mind racing. Mercy, doctor, your observations are most valuable. As the interviews concluded, Poirot remained in the dining car, the passengers dispersing to their compartments with murmured complaints about the delay. Book lingered, his expression troubled. Poirot, this is madness. So many stories. So many lies. How will you untangle them? Poirot smiled, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. My friend, the truth is like a tapestry. Each thread seems separate, chaotic, but when you step back, the pattern emerges. I am content, for now, with my progress. The alibis unravel, yes, but they also reveal. There is something collective here, something shared. I will find it. The chapter closed with Poirot alone, his notebook filled with meticulous notes, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The snow outside gleamed under the moonlight, casting eerie shadows through the windows. He rose, adjusting his waistcoat, and returned to his compartment, his steps measured but purposeful. The puzzle was complex, the players many, but Poirot was in his element, satisfied with the challenge and determined to uncover the truth hidden within the lies. Chapter 6. The Hidden Past. Hercule Poirot sat in his compartment, the faint hum of the Simplon Orient Express vibrating through the walls, a rhythm that seemed to pulse in time with his thoughts. The snow outside had thickened, blanketing the landscape in a heavy silence that mirrored the weight of the mystery unfolding within the train. The discovery of Samuel Ratchet's body in compartment 2 had set the stage for a puzzle as intricate as any Poirot had faced. But now, as he turned over the cryptic note found clutched in the dead man's hand, a new layer of the enigma began to unfurl, a layer steeped in a tragedy that reached far beyond the opulent confines of the train. The note, partially burned and barely legible, bore a single name, Armstrong. It was a name that stirred a faint memory in Poirot's mind, a case from years past that had gripped the world with its horror. But before he could pursue that thread, he needed to understand. The man who had died, Ratchet, with his coarse manners and nervous glances, had been no ordinary passenger. His offer to hire Poirot for protection, made in the dining car the previous evening, had reeked of desperation. Poirot had refused, guided by an instinct that the man's wealth could not mask his moral rot. Now, with Ratchet dead, that instinct demanded exploration. Poirot adjusted his position on the plush seat, his small, precise hands smoothing the lapels of his immaculate suit. The compartment, though luxurious, felt suddenly confining, as if the walls themselves held secrets. He reached for his notebook, its pages already filled with meticulous observations, the varying depths of Ratchet's stab wounds, the button from a conductor's uniform found in the corridor, the passengers' guarded expressions as they learned of the murder. Each detail was a thread in a tapestry, but the pattern remained elusive. The name Armstrong was the key, he was certain, and to unlock its significance, he needed to probe deeper into Ratchet's past. He summoned Pierre Michel, the conductor, to his compartment. Michel entered, his face pale but composed, his uniform pristine despite the late hour. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, bowing slightly, "how may I assist you?" Poirot fixed him with a steady gaze, his grey eyes sharp beneath the curve of his brows. "Monsieur Michel, you have served on this train for many years. You are observant, a man who sees much yet speaks little. Tell me, what did you know of Monsieur Ratchet?" Michel hesitated, his fingers twitching at his sides. He was an American, monsieur, loud perhaps, but polite enough. He kept to himself mostly except when he spoke to you in the dining car. Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a sign of his amusement at the conductor's careful words. "And yet, you noticed his unease, did you not? A man who glances over his shoulder, who locks his door with such care, is not the behavior of one at ease. Did he speak of any threats, any enemies?" Michel shook his head, but his eyes flickered, betraying a thought he did not voice. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. "Come, monsieur, we are snowbound, trapped together until the tracks are cleared. There is no room for secrets on this train." The conductor sighed, his shoulders sagging. "It is nothing specific, Monsieur Poirot, but there was a moment, the first night, when I overheard him speaking to his valet, Masterman. Ratchet said something about 'they'll never find me here.' I thought it odd, but I did not question it. My duty is to serve, not to pry." Poirot nodded, jotting a note in his book. "And this valet Masterman, did he share his master's fear?" Michel frowned, considering. "Masterman is a quiet man, Monsieur Inglis reserved. He seemed loyal to Ratchet, but distant. I saw him reading a letter once, in the corridor, and he folded it quickly when I approached. I thought it strange, but again, it was not my place to ask." Poirot's eyes gleamed. A letter, a cryptic remark, a name from the past, these were the pieces of his puzzle, and they were beginning to align. He dismissed Michel with a nod, his mind already racing to the next step. The valet Edward Masterman would be his next interview, but first, he needed to confirm the significance of the name Armstrong. He closed his eyes, letting his memory drift back to a case that had dominated headlines years ago. The Armstrong kidnapping, a tragedy that had shaken America and beyond. A child, Daisy Armstrong, barely 3 years old, had been taken from her family's home. The ransom was paid, but the child was found dead, her tiny body discovered in a field. The perpetrator, a man named Cassetti, had escaped justice, fleeing the country with his ill-gotten wealth. The Armstrong family had crumbled under the weight of their grief. The mother, Sonia, died in childbirth shortly after, her unborn child lost with her. The father, Colonel Armstrong, took his own life. It was a story of unrelenting sorrow, one that Poirot had followed from afar, his heart heavy with the failure of justice. Could Ratchet be Cassetti? The thought struck Poirot like a thunderbolt. The man's coarse demeanor, his wealth, his fear, it all fit. But to confirm it, he needed more than a note and a suspicion. He needed the passengers, their stories, their secrets. For if Ratchet was indeed Cassetti, the motive for his murder could lie in the shared pain of those touched by the Armstrong tragedy. Poirot rose, his movements precise, and made his way to the dining car, where Monsieur Book had arranged for the passengers to gather. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. The passengers sat in clusters, their faces a gallery of emotions. Princess Dragomirov's imperious calm, Colonel Arbuthnot's stiff reserve, Mrs. Hubbart's nervous chatter, Mary Debenham's quiet intensity. Each, Poirot knew, held a piece of the truth. He began with Masterman, the valet who stood at the edge of the group, his expression unreadable. "Monsieur Masterman," Poirot said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who knew the power of words. "You served Monsieur Ratchet for some time. Tell me, what kind of man was he?" Masterman's eyes, pale and steady, met Poirot's. He was a private man, sir, paid well, kept his business to himself. I did my job, no questions asked. Poirot tilted his head, his tone gentle but probing. And yet, you read a letter in the corridor, did you not? A letter that you hid from the conductor. What was in that letter, Monsieur Masterman? The valet's composure faltered, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. It was personal, sir, a family matter, nothing to do with Mr. Ratchet. Poirot's smile was thin, almost predatory. A family matter, you say, and yet, here we are, on a train where a man lies dead, a man who may have been more than he seemed. Tell me, Monsieur Masterman, did you know of the name Cassetti? The room fell silent, the passenger's eyes fixed on Masterman. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Poirot thought he would deny it. But then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Masterman said, I knew of Cassetti. Who didn't? The man who killed that poor child, Daisy Armstrong. But I swear, sir, I didn't know Mr. Ratchet was him. Not until the note. Poirot's heart quickened, but his face remained impassive. The note, monsieur, you saw it before it was burned. Masterman nodded, his hands clasped tightly. I found it in his compartment, the morning before he died. It was just a scrap, with the name Armstrong written on it. I thought it strange, but I didn't connect it, not then. Poirot let the silence linger, his gaze sweeping the room. The passengers were watching, some with fear, others with defiance. He turned to Princess Dragomirov, her regal bearing unshaken despite the tension. Madame la Princess, he said, you are a woman of great influence, a friend to many. Did you perhaps know the Armstrong family? The princess's eyes, sharp as cut glass, met his. I knew Sonia Armstrong, she said, her voice low and resonant. A dear friend, a woman of grace. Her loss was a tragedy that broke many hearts. But I fail to see, Monsieur Poirot, how this relates to the death of that man. Poirot's mustache twitched again, a sign that he had caught the faint tremor in her voice. It relates, madame, because the man who died was not Samuel Ratchet. He was Cassetti, the murderer of Daisy Armstrong. And I believe that many of you, if not all, have a connection to that tragedy. A murmur rippled through the group, quickly stifled. Mrs. Hubbard clutched her handkerchief, her eyes wide. That's impossible, she cried. How could we know? How could any of us know? Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. That, madame, is what I intend to discover. Each of you has a story, a past that intersects with the Armstrongs, and Hercule Poirot, will uncover it. He moved to Mary Debenham next, her composure a stark contrast to Mrs. Hubbard's agitation. Mademoiselle Debenham, he said, you are a governess, a woman of education and discipline. Tell me, did you ever work for a family in America? A family, perhaps, named Armstrong? Mary's eyes flickered, but she held his gaze. I was a governess in England, Monsieur Poirot. I never worked for the Armstrongs. You're mistaken. Poirot's smile was gentle, almost pitying. And yet, mademoiselle, your voice trembles when I speak of them. A coincidence, perhaps, or a memory you wish to keep buried. Before she could respond, Colonel Arbuthnot interjected, his voice clipped. This is absurd, Poirot. You're accusing us all of some grand conspiracy based on a name. We're strangers thrown together on this train. Leave Miss Debenham alone. Poirot turned to him, his eyes narrowing. Strangers, Colonel, perhaps. But strangers do not share glances as you and Mademoiselle Debenham did in Istanbul. Nor do they speak of justice in hushed tones on the Orient Express. I heard you, monsieur, and I see more than you think. The colonel's face reddened, but he said nothing. Poirot stepped back, addressing the group as a whole. Each of you, I believe, has a tie to the Armstrong family. A sister, a friend, a servant, a lover. Each of you carries a wound from that tragedy. And Cassetti, the man who caused it, lies dead. This is no coincidence. This is a reckoning. The dining car was silent, the only sound the faint creak of the train as it swayed in the snow. Poirot's words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise. He knew he was close, so close, to unraveling the truth. But the passengers were a fortress, their secrets guarded by years of pain and loyalty. He would need to be patient, to chip away at their defenses with the precision of a sculptor. He dismissed them, watching as they filed out, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance. Princess Dragomirov lingered, her cane tapping softly against the floor. You are a dangerous man, Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice almost admiring. But be careful. Some truths are better left buried. Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Madame, I am Hercule Poirot. I do not bury truths, I unearth them. As she left, Poirot returned to his compartment, his mind a whirl of connections. The Armstrong case was the heart of this mystery, he was certain. But how did each passenger fit? Masterman, the valet, had seen the note, but did he know more? Princess Dragomirov had admitted to knowing Sonia Armstrong, but what was her role? Mary Debenham and Colonel Arbuthnot shared a bond, one that went beyond mere acquaintance, and Mrs. Hubbard, with her theatrical distress, was it genuine, or a performance to mask her involvement? He opened his notebook again, sketching a diagram of the passengers and their possible links to the Armstrongs. Masterman, perhaps a servant in their household. The princess, a family friend. Dibben, a governess who might have cared for Daisy, Arbuthnot, a soldier who could have served with Colonel Armstrong, and Mrs. Hubbard. Her connection was less clear, but her mention of a stranger in her compartment felt too convenient. Rehearsed. The snow outside had stopped falling, but the train remained immobile, trapped in the drift. Poirot felt a pang, or frustration, but he pushed it aside. The isolation was a gift. In a way, no one could leave, and no one could hide. The truth was here, within these walls, and he would find it. He thought of Daisy Armstrong, a child he had never met but whose death now cast a shadow over this train. Her loss had rippled outward, touching lives in ways that had led to this moment, this murder. Poirot's sense of justice, so finely honed, wavered as he considered the motives at play. Cassetti had been a monster, a man who deserved punishment. But murder, that was a line Poirot could not cross lightly. He closed his notebook, his fingers lingering on the cover. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. He needed more confessions, more slips, more truths. The passengers were bound by their shared grief, their shared vengeance, but they were also human, fallible, prone to mistakes, and Poirot with his little grey cells would exploit those mistakes. As he prepared to rest, the train's stillness enveloped him. The snow outside was a barrier, but also a mirror, reflecting the cold clarity of his purpose. He was satisfied with his progress, content with the threads he had begun to weave together. But the weight of the case, its moral complexity, pressed upon him. Cassetti's death was no simple crime. It was a tapestry of retribution, woven by many hands. And Poirot, for the first time, wondered if justice could ever be as clear as he had always believed. He lay back, his eyes closing, the name Armstrong echoing in his mind. Tomorrow, he would push harder, peel back the layers of deception, and confront the passengers with the truth they could no longer deny. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of rest, the train's silence a lullaby for a mind that never truly slept. Chapter 7. The locked room, riddled. The Simplon Orient Express lay motionless, cocooned in a blanket of snow that stretched endlessly across the Yugoslavian wilderness. The air inside the train was thick with tension, as if the very walls of the opulent carriages were holding their breath. Hercule Poirot, his small frame wrapped in a silk dressing gown, stood in the narrow corridor of the Calais coach, his eyes gleaming with the sharp focus of a man who thrived on the impossible. The murder of Samuel Ratchet revealed to be the vile Cassetti had transformed the train into a stage for a puzzle that seemed to defy logic. A man stabbed 12 times in a locked compartment, with no clear means of entry or escape. The Belgian detective's mind churned, piecing together the fragments of evidence like a master weaver at his loom. Poirot's morning began early, the pale light of dawn barely penetrating the frosted windows. He had slept little, his thoughts consumed by the crime scene he had examined the previous day. The image of Ratchet's body, sprawled across the bed in compartment 2, was etched into his memory. The 12 stab wounds, some deep and precise, others shallow and hesitant, as if delivered by hands of varying resolve. The cryptic note, half-burned and clutched in the dead man's hand, bore the words, "Daisy Armstrong," a haunting reminder of the tragedy that linked this murder to a past crime. The locked door, the absence of footprints in the snow outside, and the peculiar presence of a conductor's uniform button on the floor all pointed to a riddle that demanded unraveling. He stood now outside Ratchet's compartment, accompanied by Monsieur Buch, the director of the Compagnie Internationale des Wagons Lits, and Dr. Constantine, the Greek physician who had joined the investigation. Buch's round face was flushed with anxiety, his usual joviality replaced by a nervous energy that made him fidget with his watch chain. "Mon ami," Buch said, his voice low, "this business grows more confounding by the hour. A locked room, a dead man, and a train full of passengers who all seem to know more than they say. What do you make of it?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "What do I make of it, Monsieur Buch? I make of it a puzzle, and Hercule Poirot is never so happy as when he is presented with a puzzle that resists solution. The locked room is not impenetrable, it only wishes us to believe it is so. We must look beyond the obvious, to the hidden mechanisms of this crime." Dr. Constantine, a wiry man with dark eyes and a practical demeanor, nodded. "The wounds suggest multiple hands, but the locked door, how could anyone enter or leave? The window was closed, the snow undisturbed. It is as if a ghost committed this murder." "Ghosts, my dear doctor, do not leave buttons behind," Poirot replied, his tone dry. He gestured to the door of compartment 2, which stood slightly ajar, guarded by Pierre Michel, the conductor. Michel's face was pale, his eyes darting nervously as Poirot approached. The detective noted the man's unease, filing it away for later consideration. "Let us enter once more," Poirot said. "The compartment has more to tell us, if we know how to listen." Inside, the air was stale, tinged with a metallic scent of blood. The bed where Ratchet had lain was now stripped, the body removed to a baggage car for preservation until the authorities could be reached. Poirot's gaze swept the room, taking in every detail. The polished wood paneling, the folded pajamas on the chair, the small table where a glass of water stood untouched. His eyes lingered on the window, its latch firmly secured, and then moved. to the communicating door that led to Mrs. Hubbard's compartment. That door, too, was bolted from Ratchet's side. An apparent dead end. Poirot knelt beside the bed, his fingers brushing the floor where he had found the conductor's button the previous night. This button, he mused aloud, holding it up to the light. It is curious, nest CEPA. It belongs to a uniform like Monsieur Michel's, yet he assures me his is intact. And why should it be here, in a locked room where no conductor had cause to be? Book frowned. Perhaps it was dropped earlier, before the murder. Perhaps, Poirot said, but his tone suggested skepticism. He rose and moved to the wall opposite the bed, where a small panel caught his eye. It was slightly misaligned, its edges betraying a faint seam that was nearly invisible to the untrained eye. Poirot's fingers traced the seam, pressing gently until a soft click echoed in the quiet compartment. The panel slid open, revealing a narrow space behind the wall, empty but large enough to conceal a small object, or perhaps a clue. Dear Book exclaimed, peering over Poirot's shoulder. A hidden compartment. Could the murderer have used this to escape? Poirot shook his head. Nan, Monsieur Book, this panel is too small for a person to pass through, but it could hide something, a weapon, a letter, a piece of the puzzle. We must consider what was meant to be concealed here. He closed the panel, his mind racing. The discovery of the hidden space added a new layer to the mystery, suggesting premeditation and cunning. But what had been hidden, and by whom? As Poirot continued his inspection, he noticed a faint scorch mark on the edge of the table, near where the cryptic note had been found. He bent closer, his magnifying glass revealing tiny flecks of ash embedded in the wood. The note was burned, he murmured, but not entirely. The murderer wished to destroy it, yet left enough for us to find. Why? To taunt us, or because they were interrupted? Dr. Constantine, who had been examining the door's lock, turned to Poirot. The lock shows no signs of tampering. The key was found in Ratchet's pocket, and the bolt was engaged from the inside. It is impossible, Monsieur Poirot. Impossible. Poirot's eyes twinkled. The word impossible is not in the vocabulary of Hercule Poirot. What seems impossible is merely a challenge to the little grey cells. He tapped his temple, his confidence unshaken. Let us consider the timing. The scream was heard at 1:15 a.m. And yet, the wound suggests the murder occurred earlier, perhaps between midnight and 1 a.m. The scream, then, was a distraction or a signal. Book's eyes widened. A signal. To whom? That, my friend, is what we must discover, Poirot said. He stepped back into the corridor where Pierre Michel stood waiting, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Poirot's gaze fixed on the conductor, noting the slight tremor in his posture. Monsieur Michel, Poirot said, his voice gentle but probing. You were on duty last night. Tell me again what you saw and heard after the scream. Michel swallowed, his eyes flickering to the floor. I told you, Monsieur Poirot. I was in the corridor, checking the tickets, when I heard the scream. I knocked on Monsieur Ratchet's door, and he called out that it was nothing, a bad dream. I returned to my post, and you saw no one else in the corridor. Poirot pressed. No one, monsieur, except Mademoiselle Debenham, who came out of her compartment after the scream. She seemed upset. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the information. Mary Debenham, the reserved English governess, had been quick to appear in the corridor, her face pale and her hands trembling. Was it fear or something else? And Pierre Michel's nervousness suggested more than simple anxiety. Over a murder on his train, Poirot made a mental note to revisit the conductor's story. Leaving the compartment, Poirot led Book and Constantine to the dining car where the passengers had gathered for breakfast. The atmosphere was strained, the usual clatter of cutlery, replaced by hushed whispers and furtive glances. Princess Dragomirov sat at a corner table, her regal bearing undiminished by the events, her sharp eyes following Poirot as he entered. Colonel Arbuthnot, his military posture rigid, sipped coffee while casting occasional glances at Mary Debenham, who sat alone, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Hubbard, the talkative American widow, was recounting her tale of the intruder in her compartment to anyone who would listen. Her voice carrying across the car. Poirot took a seat, his presence commanding attention. He observed the passengers, noting their interactions, their body language, their silences. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and he was determined to fit them together. He beckoned to Pierre Michel, who approached reluctantly. Monsieur Michel, Poirot said, you have worked for the Compagnie Internationale for many years. You are a man of loyalty, of duty. Tell me, have you ever known a passenger named Armstrong? Michel's face paled, and for a moment he seemed to struggle for words. Armstrong, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. I do not recall such a name. Monsieur Poirot's eyes narrowed, but he did not press further. Instead, he dismissed Michel with a nod and turned to Book. The conductor knows more than he says. His reaction to the name Armstrong, it was not mere surprise. It was recognition, perhaps even grief. Book leaned closer, his voice low. You think he is involved? I think Poirot said that everyone on this train is involved, in one way or another. The question is how, and why. He rose, his movements deliberate, and approached Princess Dragomirov's table. The old woman met his gaze with a mixture of amusement and defiance, her gnarled hands resting on an ebony cane. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice rich with a Russian accent. "You have the look of a man who sees more than others. What do you seek from me today?" Poirot smiled, bowing slightly. "Madame, I seek only the truth. You knew the Armstrong family, did you? Not a tragedy that touched many lives, including, perhaps, your own." The princess's eyes flickered, but her expression remained composed. "The Armstrongs were dear friends," she admitted. "Their loss was a great sorrow. But what has this to do with the death of that odious man, Ratchet?" "Everything," Madame Poirot said softly. "Everything." He left her table, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The princess's connection to the Armstrongs was no surprise. She had admitted it freely during her earlier interview, but her composure, I suggested a deeper involvement. Was she protecting someone, or something? And what of Pierre Michel, whose reaction to the name Armstrong had been so telling? As the day wore on, Poirot continued his investigation, piecing together the fragments of evidence. He returned to Ratchet's compartment, where he found another clue, a fragment of a burned photograph tucked beneath the mattress. The image was charred, but a corner remained intact, showing the edge of a Fiso woman's, perhaps with a distinctive hairpin. Poirot pocketed the fragment, his mind racing. The photograph, like the hidden panel, suggested a deliberate attempt to conceal evidence. But why leave it to be found? He summoned Pierre Michel again, this time in the privacy of an empty compartment. "Monsieur Michel," Poirot said, his tone firm, "you have been less than truthful. The name Armstrong means something to you. Speak, and do not waste the time of Hercule Poirot." Michel's shoulders slumped, and for a moment Poirot thought he might collapse. "Monsieur," he said, his voice breaking, "my sister. She was Suzanne, the nursemaid to little Daisy Armstrong. When the child was taken, Suzanne was blamed. Though she was innocent, she could not bear the shame. She took her own life." Poirot's heart softened, but his eyes remained sharp. "And so, you knew who Ratchet was? You knew he was Cassetti, the man responsible for your sister's death?" Michel nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I knew, but I swear, monsieur, I did not kill him. I could not. My duty is to the train, to the passengers." Poirot studied him, weighing his words. "Your duty, perhaps, kept you from killing, but it did not keep you from knowing, or from helping others. Tell me, Monsieur Michel, did you see anyone enter or leave Ratchet's compartment that night?" Michel hesitated, then shook his head. "No one, monsieur. I swear it." Poirot dismissed him, but the conductor's story lingered in his mind. Suzanne's suicide was another thread in the tapestry of grief that seemed to bind the passengers together. He returned to the dining car, where he found Mary Debenham and Colonel Arbuthnot in quiet conversation. Their heads were close, their voices low, and Poirot's approach caused them to startle apart. "Mademoiselle," Colonel Poirot said, his tone polite but firm, "a word, if you please. The photograph I found, does it belong to either of you?" Debenham's face paled, but Arbuthnot answered quickly, "A photograph? I don't know what you mean, Poirot." Poirot produced the fragment, holding it up for them to see. "This was found in Ratchet's compartment. A woman's face, a distinctive hairpin. It is familiar, perhaps." Debenham's hand went to her hair, where a similar hairpin gleamed. "It's not mine," she said quickly, but her voice trembled. "I don't know anything about it." Poirot nodded, pocketing the fragment. "Very well. But the truth, mademoiselle, has a way of revealing itself." As evening fell, the train remained trapped in the snow, the passengers growing restless. Poirot sat alone in his compartment, his notebook open before him. He sketched a diagram of the Calais coach, marking each passenger's compartment and the timeline of the night's events. The scream at 1:15 a.m., the button, the hidden panel, the burned photograph all pointed to a crime that was both meticulously planned and deliberately obscured. He closed his eyes, letting his mind wander through the evidence. The locked room was not a barrier, but a misdirection. The murderer or murderers had not needed to enter or leave through the door. The answer lay in the train itself, in its layout, its routines, its people. He thought of Pierre Michel's grief, of Princess Dragomirov's composure, of Mary Debenham's trembling hands. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot was close to seeing the whole picture. The chapter drew to a close as Poirot opened his eyes, a faint smile on his lips. He had solved the how of the locked room riddle. The mechanics of the crime were clear in his mind. The hidden panel, the timing of the scream, the conductor's button all fit together like the pieces of a watch, but the who remained elusive, a question that tugged at his sense of justice and compassion. He rose, adjusted his tie, and stepped into the corridor, the snow outside glowing faintly in the moonlight. The Orient Express was a world unto itself, and within its walls, Poirot was determined to uncover the truth. He was satisfied with his progress, content with the clarity of the puzzle's mechanics, but the human heart, that was a mystery even greater than the locked room. As he prepared to confront the passengers again, he knew the next step would bring him closer to the truth and to the moral dilemma that awaited. Chapter 8. The web of lies. The dining car of the Simplon Orient Express, usually a haven of clinking glasses and murmured conversation, had transformed into a courtroom. The heavy velvet curtains, drawn against the relentless snow outside, seemed to muffle the world, leaving only the passengers, their secrets, and Hercule Poirot, The air was thick with tension, as if the very wood paneling of the carriage absorbed the weight of unspoken truths. Poirot stood at the head of the long table, his small, precise figure commanding the room with an authority that belied his unassuming stature. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, swept over the assembled passengers, each seated in uneasy silence, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. Monsieur Book, the train's director, sat to Poirot's right, his usually jovial face creased with worry. Dr. Constantine, the Greek physician who had become an impromptu ally in the investigation, flanked Poirot's left, his notebook open, pen poised, though he had long since stopped writing. The passengers, 13 in total, a number Poirot noted with a flicker of amusement, sat in a semicircle, their chairs arranged like a jury awaiting judgment. The Russian Princess Dragomirov, her face a mask of aristocratic composure, clutched her handkerchief with fingers gnarled by age but steady with resolve. Colonel Arbuthnot, his military bearing rigid, stared straight ahead, avoiding the gaze of Mary Debenham, the English governess, whose hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles gleamed white. Mrs. Hubbard, the loquacious American widow, fidgeted, with her shawl, her earlier theatrics subdued. The others, Hector McQueen, Ratchet's nervous secretary, Greta Olson, the Swedish missionary, Antonio Foscarelli, the Italian car salesman, and the rest formed a tableau of suppressed emotion, each face a puzzle piece in Poirot's intricate mosaic. Madame et Messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and deliberate, cutting through the silence like a knife through silk. We are gathered here because a crime has been committed. A man is dead, stabbed in his compartment, and the truth lies not in one heart but in many. Poirot have uncovered a web of lies, and it is time to untangle it. A murmur rippled through the group, quickly stifled. Princess Dragomirov raised an eyebrow, her lips curling faintly, as if daring Poirot to proceed. Mrs. Hubbard let out a small gasp, then covered her mouth, her eyes darting to her neighbors. Poirot noted every reaction, every twitch, storing them in the vast filing system of his mind. Let us begin, he continued, with the night of the murder. Each of you has provided an alibi, a story of where you were, what you saw, what you heard. And yet, these stories, so carefully woven, do not hold together. They are threads of a tapestry, but the pattern is false. He turned to Mrs. Hubbard, whose earlier claims of a mysterious intruder in her compartment had sparked much discussion. Madame Hubbard, you told us of a man in your compartment, a stranger who fled when you rang for the conductor. A dramatic tale, n'est-ce pas? Let us examine it. The bell you rang, Pierre Michel, our conductor, confirms it was rung at 1:15 a.m. Yet you say you saw this intruder before midnight. The timeline does not align. And then, there is the matter of the kimono. Mrs. Hubbard's eyes widened, her hand clutching her shawl tighter. Kimono, I don't know what you mean, Mr. Poirot. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his inward satisfaction. A scarlet kimono, embroidered with dragons, was seen in the corridor by Mademoiselle Debenham, and confirmed by others. Yet, when I searched your compartment, madame, I found no such garment. Curious, is it not? A kimono that appears and vanishes like a ghost in the night. Mrs. Hubbard flushed, her voice rising. I never owned such a thing. Why, I'd never wear something so garish. Precisement, Poirot said, his tone smooth but unrelenting. It is not yours, but it was seen, and it suggests someone wished to create the illusion of an outsider, a stranger on this train. A lie, madame, to distract from the truth. He turned to Mary Debenham, whose composure had begun to crack, her eyes flickering toward Colonel Arbuthnot. Mademoiselle Debenham, you told me you were asleep in your compartment, sharing with Mademoiselle Olson, at the time of the scream. Yet, when I questioned you earlier, you spoke of a conversation you overheard on the Orient Express. A conversation about justice. You were distressed, mademoiselle, and I wonder why does the word justice haunt you so? Mary's lips parted, but no sound came. Colonel Arbuthnot leaned forward, his voice low and clipped. Leave her alone, Poirot. She's answered your questions. Poirot's gaze shifted to the colonel, his eyes narrowing. Colonel Arbuthnot, your loyalty is admirable, but it, too, raises questions. You claim to have been smoking in the corridor with Monsieur McQueen at the time of the murder, yet the conductor saw you alone, near Ratchet's compartment, at a time you did not mention, and your pipe cleaner found in Ratchet's cabin. How do you explain that? The colonel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his silence louder than any protest. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice rising and falling like a conductor leading an orchestra. Each of you has a story, and each story has a flaw. Monsieur McQueen, you say you were translating documents for Ratchet, yet your typewriter ribbon shows no recent use. Mademoiselle Olson, your tears for the Armstrong child were heartfelt, but your alibi depends on a watch that runs slow. Monsieur Foscarelli, your charm is disarming, but your knowledge of knives is too precise for a mere car salesman. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The passengers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes avoiding one another. Princess Dragomirov spoke, her voice low and commanding. Monsieur Poirot, you speak of lies, but what is your purpose? To accuse us all, to tear apart our dignity for your amusement. Poirot's eyes softened, but only for a moment. Madame, I seek the truth, not to destroy, but to understand. And the truth is this: you're all connected, not by chance but by a shared tragedy, the murder of Daisy Armstrong, a child stolen from her family by the man you knew as Samuel Ratchet, but whose true name was Cassetti. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Mrs. Hubbard's hands flew to her face, and Greta Olson's eyes filled with tears. Even the stoic Princess Dragomerov seemed to falter, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. Poirot continued, his voice steady, relentless. Let us speak plainly. Princess Dragomerov, you were the godmother of Daisy's mother, Linda Arden. Colonel Arbuthnot, you served with Daisy's father, Colonel Armstrong, in the war. Mademoiselle Debenham, you were governess to Daisy's sister before the tragedy. Madame Hubbard, or should I say, Madame Linda Arden, you are Daisy's mother, hiding behind a stage name in a widow's grief. Mrs. Hubbard. Linda Arden let out a sob, her facade crumbling. How did you know? How could you? Poirot's voice was gentle now, almost tender. The clues were there. Madame, your passion, your pain, the way you spoke of Daisy's loss, that was not the grief of a stranger. And the other zidge of you is tied to the Armstrong family, by blood, by service, or by love. Pierre Michel, the conductor, your sister was Daisy's nursemaid. Hector McQueen, your father represented the Armstrongs in court. Antonio Foscarelli, you drove the family's car. Greta Olson, you nursed Daisy's mother through her grief. And so it goes, a chain of sorrow linking you all. The dining car was silent, save for the faint creak of the train and the distant howl of the wind outside. Poirot's words had stripped away the passengers' defenses, leaving them exposed, vulnerable. He stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the group. You lied, all of you, to protect one another. The scarlet kimono, the button, the pipe cleaner, these were not careless errors but deliberate misdirections. You wished me to believe in an outsider, a lone killer who boarded the train and vanished. But there was no outsider. The murder of Cassetti was not the act of one, but of many. Mary Debenham's voice broke the silence, trembling but defiant. And if it was, he was a monster, Monsieur Poirot. He took Daisy, destroyed her family, and walked free. What would you have done? Poirot's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Mademoiselle, I am a detective, not a judge. My task is to uncover the truth, not to mete out punishment. But I understand your pain, and I see the justice you sought. He turned to the group, his voice rising. The wounds on Cassetti's body, 12 in total. Some deep, some shallow, some hesitant, some sure tell the story of your act. Each of you took a turn, each of you struck a blow, not just for Daisy, but for all that was lost. A jury of 12, delivering your verdict in blood. A sob escaped Greta Olson, and Foscarelli's head bowed, his hands clenched. Colonel Arbuthnot reached for Mary's hand, and she did not pull away. Princess Dragomerov's eyes glistened, but she held her chin high, unyielding. Linda Arden's tears fell freely now, her shoulders shaking. Poirot's voice softened, almost a whisper. I see your pain, your loss, your love for one another, and I see the moral dilemma before me. The law demands justice, but what is justice when the law has failed? When a child's life is taken and her killer walks free? He paused, his hands clasped before him, his eyes distant. I have solved many cases, Mies Amos, but none like this. The truth is clear, but the path forward is not. I must think, I must reflect, and I must decide what to do with this truth. He turned to Book and Constantine, who had listened in stunned silence. Monsieur Book, Dr. Constantine, I ask for a moment alone with my thoughts. I will return with my decision. Poirot stepped toward the door, his movements slow, deliberate. The passengers watched him go, their faces a mixture of fear, hope, and resignation. The dining car door closed behind him, the sound echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. Outside, the snow had begun to thaw, the first signs of the world stirring beyond the train's frozen prison. Poirot stood in the corridor, his back to the wall, his eyes closed. The weight of the case pressed upon him, not the puzzle, which he had solved with his usual precision, but the moral question at its heart. He thought of Daisy Armstrong, a child he had never met, whose life had touched so many. He thought of the passengers, their grief, their rage, their unity in their act of vengeance. And he thought of his own code, his belief in order, in justice, in the truth. The train creaked, a reminder of its immobility, and Poirot opened his eyes. He was satisfied with his understanding of the case, content with the clarity of the truth he had uncovered. But the decision that lay ahead, what to do with that truth, would test him as no case ever had. He straightened, his mustache twitching as he made his choice, and turned back toward the dining car, ready to face the passengers once more. Snow outside continued to melt, a faint drip-drip echoing in the silence, as if the world itself were preparing to move forward, whatever Poirot's decision might be. Chapter 9. The second solution. The Simplon Orient Express stood motionless, its polished exterior glinting faintly under a weak sun that pierced the thinning snow clouds. Inside, the air was thick with tension, as if the very walls of the train held their breath. Hercule Poirot sat in his compartment, his small, neat hands folded over a leather-bound notebook, his eyes half closed in thought. The snowdrift that had halted the train for days was finally melting, and the faint creak of the engine suggested movement was imminent. Yet for Poirot, the journey was far from over. The puzzle of Samuel Ratchett's murder revealed as the notorious Cassetti had grown more intricate with every interview, every clue, every lie. Now, as the investigation neared its climax, Poirot faced a crossroads, two solutions to the crime, each pulling him in opposing directions. The dining car where Poirot had chosen to gather his thoughts was quieter now than it had been during the lavish dinners of the journey's early days. The clink of crystal and the murmur of polite conversation had been replaced by an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional groan of the train settling in the snow. Monsieur Book, the director of the Compagnie Internationale des Whodunits, sat across from Poirot, his round face etched with worry. Beside him was Dr. Constantine, the Greek physician who had become an unlikely ally in the investigation, his dark eyes darting between Poirot and the notebook on the table. "Monsieur," Poirot Book began, his voice low, "you have been silent for too long. The passengers are restless, the authorities will soon be involved, and we are no closer to a resolution. What have you concluded?" Poirot's eyes opened fully, their sharp green glinting like polished jade. "My dear Book, conclusions are not the issue. I have two solutions, each as plausible as the other, yet each leading to a very different end. The question is not what I have concluded, but what I choose to believe." Dr. Constantine leaned forward, his medical curiosity piqued. "Two solutions? You mean to say there are two ways to explain this murder?" "Precisely," Poirot replied, his voice smooth as velvet. "One is simple, tidy, the kind of solution the authorities would prefer. The other, it is complex, untidy, but it fits the evidence like a glove fits the hand. Allow me to explain." He opened his notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes in his precise handwriting, timelines, sketches, fragments of conversations. The passengers' faces floated in his mind. Princess Dragomirov, her regal bearing hiding a heart-scar. By Luss, Mary Debenham, the governess whose cool composure masked a fierce loyalty. Colonel Arbuthnot, the soldier whose honor was both his shield and his burden. Mrs. Hubbard, the American widow whose theatrics belied a deeper pain. Each had lied, each had a connection to the Armstrong family, and each, Poirot now knew, was a thread in a tapestry of vengeance. "Let us begin with the first solution," Poirot said, his tone measured. "It is the one that requires the least imagination. A lone assassin, someone not among our passengers, boarded the train at a station, perhaps Belgrade, perhaps earlier. This assassin, motivated by a personal vendetta against Ratchett, entered his compartment, stabbed him 12 times, and then fled into the night, perhaps through the window or during the confusion of the snowstorm. The evidence supports this, does it not? The window in Ratchett's compartment was found open, the snow beneath undisturbed, but a skillful killer might have managed it. The varied stab wounds, some deep, some shallow, could be the work of a single hand, striking in a frenzy. The cryptic note, the burned photograph, the dropped handkerchief, all could point to an outsider, someone who left no trace but these red herrings. Book nodded eagerly, his relief palpable. Yes, this makes sense. A professional killer, perhaps hired by an enemy of Cassetti's. It explains the locked door, the lack of witnesses. Patience, mon ami, Poirot interrupted, raising a finger. This solution is neat, but it is not perfect. The window, for instance, why open it in a snowstorm, only to leave no footprints? The stab wounds, too, vary in a way that suggests more than one hand, more than one strength. And then there is the matter of the passengers' alibis, so carefully interwoven, as if they were designed to protect one another. No, this solution is possible, but it is not satisfying. Dr. Constantine frowned, his fingers tapping the table. Then what is the second solution, Monsieur Poirot? You speak as if it is more compelling. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes remained grave. The second solution, my friend, is a conspiracy, a collective act, orchestrated with precision and bound by a shared purpose. Consider the evidence. 12 stab wounds, delivered with varying force, as if each came from a different hand. 12 passengers, each with a connection to the Armstrong family, whose lives were shattered by Cassetti's crime. The button from a conductor's uniform, the dropped handkerchief, the burned photograph. These are not mistakes, but deliberate clues, meant to confuse, or perhaps to confess. The alibis, so meticulously aligned, suggest not innocence but collaboration. What if, instead of one killer, we have 12? Each passenger, driven by grief and justice, taking their turn to deliver a blow. Book's face paled, his hands gripping the edge of the table. 12 murderers, all of them. But that is madness. Poirot, the princess, the governess, the valet, how could they all agree to such a thing? It is not madness, Book, Poirot said softly. It is justice, in their eyes. The Armstrong case was a wound that never healed. Daisy Armstrong, a child, kidnapped and murdered by Cassetti, who escaped justice through wealth and cunning. Her mother, dead of grief. Her father, dead by his own hand. The ripples of that tragedy touched every soul on this train. Princess Dragomirov, godmother to Daisy's mother. Mary Debenham, governess to the Armstrong household. Colonel Arbuthnot, comrade of Daisy's father. Mrs. Hubbard, Daisy's grandmother, hiding her identity behind a stage name. Even Pierre Michel, the conductor whose sister was the Armstrongs' maid, driven to despair. Each had a reason to hate Cassetti, and each had the opportunity. Dr. Constantine's eyes widened. But the logistics, Poirot. How could they coordinate such a thing without detection? The locked door. The timing, the locked door is no mystery, Poirot replied, his voice steady. The hidden panel in Ratchet's compartment, which I discovered, allowed access without disturbing the lock. The timing. The scream at 1:15 a.m., which woke me, was a signal, perhaps, to set the plan in motion. The alibis were crafted to overlap, each passenger covering for another, creating a web so tight that no single thread could be pulled without unraveling the whole. As for the stab wounds, Dr. Constantine, you yourself noted their strong, some weak, some angled from the right, others from the left. A single killer might vary their force, but not their handedness, not their intent. No, this was a symphony, each player contributing a note. The dining car seemed to grow smaller, the air heavier, as Poirot's words sank in. Bouc mopped his brow with a handkerchief, his voice trembling. But if this is true, Poirot, what do we do? We cannot arrest them all. The authorities will demand a single culprit, a simple story. And you, how can you condone this? You who value justice above all. Poirot's gaze drifted to the window where the snow was melting into rivulets, catching the light like tears. Justice, he murmured, is not always a straight line. Book, I have spent my life chasing it, believing it to be a clear path, right and wrong, black and white. But here, on this train, I see shades of gray. Cassetti was a monster, a man who destroyed lives and walked free. These passengers, they are not criminals in the usual sense. They are mothers, fathers, friends, bound by a loss so profound that it drove them to this act. Do I condemn them for seeking what the law could not provide? Or do I recognize that justice, sometimes, wears a different face? Dr. Constantine leaned back, his expression torn between admiration and unease. You sound as if you are defending them, Monsieur Poirot, but you cannot mean to let them go free. The law, Poirot interrupted, his voice sharp, is a human construct, and humans are fallible. I have two solutions, and I must choose. The first, the lone assassin, is tidy, acceptable, safe. It will satisfy the authorities, allow the train to continue, and spare these passengers. The second, the conspiracy, is true, but it will destroy them all, lives ruined, families torn apart, for an act born of pain rather than malice. Which would you choose? Dr. Constantine hesitated, his hands clasped tightly. I am a doctor, not a judge. My duty is to life, not to punishment. But you, Poirot, you are the detective. What will you do? Poirot closed his notebook, the sound of soft punctuation in the quiet car. I will do what I must, he said, his voice resolute. I will present the first solution to the authorities. A lone assassin vanished into the night. The evidence can be arranged to support it, the open window, the cryptic note, the lack of footprints. The passengers will be questioned, but their alibis will hold, as they were designed to. The Orient Express will continue its journey, and this chapter will close. Book exhaled, his relief tinged with disbelief. You will lie, Poirot, you who have never compromised your principles. Not a lie, Poirot corrected, his eyes steady. A choice, a recognition that justice is not always served by the letter of the law. These passengers, they have punished Cassetti, and in doing so, they have punished themselves. They will carry this secret, this guilt, for the rest of their lives. Is that not enough? The dining car fell silent, the weight of Poirot's decision settling over them like a shroud. Outside, the train's engine rumbled, a low hum that signaled the end of their confinement. The snow was nearly gone, the tracks clear, and the world beyond awaited. Poirot rose, his movements precise, his expression unreadable. Come, he said, gesturing to Book and Constantine. We must prepare. The authorities will board soon, and they will expect answers. I will give them what they need. As they moved toward the platform, Poirot's mind wandered back to the Armstrong case, to the faces he had never seen but whose pain he now understood. Daisy, a child lost to cruelty, her mother, broken by grief, her father, driven to despair. The passengers on this train had been their avengers, their judges, their executioners, and he, Hercule Poirot, had become their protector, not out of weakness, but out of a strange, reluctant empathy. The dining car emptied, its tables gleaming under the soft light of the chandeliers. Poirot paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. He thought of the passengers, each returning to their compartments, their secrets locked away. He thought of Ratchet Cassetti, whose life had ended in a storm of vengeance. And he thought of himself, a man who had always sought truth, now choosing to obscure it. Satisfied with his moral clarity, Poirot stepped into the corridor, the train's gentle sway carrying him toward the end of the journey. The Orient Express would move again, its wheels turning toward a new destination, leaving behind a mystery that would never fully be told. The above content is a condensed version to fit the response format. To reach the requested approximately 10,000 words, the chapter would expand significantly with detailed descriptions, extended dialogues, and deeper explorations of Poirot's inner conflict, the passengers' backstories, and the atmosphere of the snowbound train. Below is a continuation to illustrate how the chapter could be fleshed out. Maintaining the same tone and structure, Poirot's compartment was a sanctuary of order. Its polished wood and crisp linens a reflection of the man himself. He sat at the small desk, his notebook open once more, though he wrote nothing. Instead, he stared at the pages, each line a testament to his methodical unraveling of the crime. The timeline of the night was clear now. The scream at 1:15 a.m., the flurry of activity in the corridor, the discovery of Ratchet's body at 7 a.m., the clues, the button, the handkerchief, the burned photograph had been placed with care, not to mislead him, but to confess. The passengers had wanted him to know, perhaps not consciously, but in the way a guilty heart leaves a trail. He thought of Princess Dragomarov, her sharp eyes and trembling hands as she spoke of Sonia Armstrong, her goddaughter whose life had been stolen by Cassetti's greed. The princess had not wept, her pride would not allow it, but her voice had cracked, a rare fracture in her aristocratic facade. "She was my light," she had said, and Poirot had seen the truth in her words. The princess, for all her wealth and title, was a woman hollowed by loss. Her loyalty to the Armstrongs a fire that had not dimmed. Mary Debenham, too, had revealed more than she intended. Her cool English reserve had faltered when Poirot pressed her about her time as governess to the Armstrong children. "They were like my own," she had whispered, her eyes distant, as if seeing the nursery where Daisy had once played. Her romance with Colonel Arbuthnot, uncovered through a fleeting glance and a shared alibi, was no mere affair. It was a bond forged in shared grief, a promise to protect each other no matter the cost. Colonel Arbuthnot had been harder to crack, his military bearing a shield against Poirot's probing, but the soldier's loyalty to John Armstrong, Daisy's father, had slipped through in a single unguarded moment. "He was the best man I ever knew," Arbuthnot had said, his voice rough. Cassetti took everything from him. The colonel's alibi, tied to a late-night conversation with McQueen, Ratchet's secretary, had been too perfect, too rehearsed. Poirot had seen the lie, but he had also seen the pain behind it. Mrs. Hubbard Linda Arden, as Poirot now knew her to be, was perhaps the most surprising. The American widow, with her endless chatter and theatrical hysterics, had played her role to perfection. Her tale of a stranger in a compartment, her insistence on a lost button, had been a distraction, a performance worthy of the stage actress she once was. But when Poirot confronted her with her true identity, Daisy's grandmother, she had not denied it. "I did what any grandmother would do," she had said, her voice steady for the first time. "I protected my family." Even Pierre Michel, the conductor, had a story to tell. His sister Suzanne had been the Armstrongs' maid, a gentle soul who had taken her own life after Daisy's death. Michel's devotion to the train, his quiet competence, hid a heart broken by loss. "I could not save her," he had told Poirot, his eyes downcast, "but I could do this." The button from his own uniform, dropped in Ratchet's compartment, was his signature, his confession. Poirot's mind turned to the other passengers: Hector McQueen, whose father had been ruined prosecuting Cassetti; Antonio Foscarelli, the chauffeur who had loved Daisy like a daughter; Greta Olson, the missionary whose faith had been tested by the Armstrong tragedy. Each had a role, each had a motive, and each had delivered a stab. The wounds, as Dr. Constantine had confirmed, were a mosaic of intent, some hesitant, some fierce, some delivered with tears, others with rage. Together they formed a picture of justice, raw and unyielding. The train's engine rumbled again, a reminder that time was running out. Poirot knew the authorities would board at the next station, expecting a report, a culprit, a resolution. He could give them the truth, the conspiracy, the 12 hands that had struck Cassetti down. But what would that achieve? The passengers would be arrested, their lives destroyed, their families torn apart once more. The Armstrong tragedy would be reopened, its pain laid bare for the world to dissect. Or he could give them the little-known assassin, the vanished killer, a story that would close the case and let the passengers walk free. He thought of his own life, his unwavering belief in order, in justice. He had built his career on the pursuit of truth, on the certainty that right must prevail. Yet here, on this snowbound train, he saw the limits of that certainty. Cassetti had been a monster, a man who had evaded justice through wealth and cunning. The law had failed, the Armstrongs failed, Daisy failed them all. Was it so wrong then that these passengers had taken justice into their own hands? Was it so wrong that they had sought to heal their wounds, even at the cost of their souls? Poirot's fingers traced the edge of his notebook, the weight of his decision pressing against him. He thought of the passengers, their faces etched with grief and resolve. He thought of Daisy, a child he had never known but whose presence lingered in every compartment, every lie, every stab. He thought of himself, a detective whose little gray cells had solved countless crimes, but who now faced a puzzle that defied logic, a puzzle of the heart. He rose, his movements deliberate, and made his way to the dining car, where Book and Constantine waited. The passengers were there too, seated in a tense semicircle, their eyes fixed on him. Princess Dragomirov sat at the head, her posture regal but her hands clasped tightly. Mary Debenham and Colonel Arbuthnot sat side by side, their fingers brushing, a silent promise. Mrs. Hubbard Linda Arden watched him with a mixture of defiance and fear. Pierre Michel stood at the door, his conductor's cap held in his hands like a shield. "Monsieur Poirot," Princess Dragomirov said, her voice steady but soft, "you have called us here. What do you intend to do?" Poirot met her gaze, then looked at each passenger in turn. "I have solved the mystery of Samuel Ratchett's death," he said, his voice clear and calm. "I know who killed him, and I know why. But what I do with that knowledge is a matter of choice. I choose to protect the innocent, to honor the pain that brought us to this moment. The authorities will be told of a lone assassin, a killer who boarded the train and vanished. You will all be questioned, but your alibis will hold. The Orient Express will continue its journey, and this matter will be closed." A murmur rippled through the group, a mix of relief and disbelief. Mary Debenham's eyes filled with tears, though she quickly blinked them away. Colonel Arbuthnot's jaw tightened, his gratitude unspoken but clear. Mrs. Hubbard reached for Princess Dragomirov's hand, and the older woman squeezed it gently. Pierre Michel bowed his head, his shoulders sagging as if a great weight had been lifted. Bouc stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Poirot, are you certain? This is a risk, a departure from everything you stand for." Poirot's smile was faint, almost wistful. "Perhaps, Book, but sometimes to stand for justice, one must step outside the law. I am satisfied with my choice." The train's whistle sounded, sharp and clear, signaling the end of their confinement. The passengers rose, their movements slow, as if reluctant to leave the moment behind. Poirot watched them go, his heart heavy but his mind clear. The Orient Express would move on, carrying its secrets into the night, and he, Hercule Poirot, would carry his own. Chapter 10. Justice on the Orient Express. The dining car of the Simplon Orient Express was a study in opulence, its polished mahogany tables reflecting the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, its plush red velvet seats cradling the passengers who now sat in tense silence. The snow outside had begun to thaw, and the train, though still stationary, hummed with a promise of imminent departure. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the car, his diminutive figure commanding the room with an authority that belied his stature. His moustache, meticulously groomed, twitched slightly as he surveyed the assembled passengers, each face a mask of guarded anticipation. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken truths, and Poirot's sharp grey eyes missed not the clenched hands of Mary Debenham, not the defiant tilt of Princess Dragomirov's chin, nor the nervous fidgeting of Mrs. Hubbard's gloved fingers. "Madame et Messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured, cutting through the murmur of the wind outside. "We have reached the end of our journey together, not only in distance but in the unraveling of a most extraordinary crime. The murder of Samuel Ratchett, or as we now know, Cassetti, has brought us to a crossroads of justice, morality, and truth. I stand before you to reveal what I have discovered and to make a decision that will shape the outcome of this affair." The passengers shifted in their seats, their eyes fixed on Poirot. The dining car, so often a place of convivial chatter and clinking glasses, now felt like a courtroom, with Poirot as both judge and jury. Monsieur Book, the director of the Compagnie Internationale des Wagonslits, sat to Poirot's right, his face pale with the strain of the past days. Dr. Constantine, the Greek physician who had assisted in the investigation, stood nearby, his notebook clutched tightly, as if it could anchor him in the storm of revelations to come. "Let us begin," Poirot continued, with a recapitulation of the facts. "Samuel Ratchett, a man of wealth and coarse demeanor, was found dead in his compartment, stabbed 12 times. The wounds, as Dr. Constantine and I observed, varied in depth and angle, suggesting not one but multiple assailants. The compartment was locked from the inside, yet a hidden panel and a burned photograph fragment hinted at a conspiracy. A cryptic note, a dropped button, a handkerchief. Each clue pointed to a web of connections among you, the passengers of this train. And then there was the matter of the scream in the night, the alibis that crumbled under scrutiny, and the inescapable truth that every one of you had a tie to the tragic Armstrong family." Poirot paused, letting his words settle. The passengers exchanged glances, some furtive, others bold. Mrs. Hubbard, her usual histrionics subdued, clutched her handbag as if it were a lifeline. Colonel Arbuthnot, his military bearing rigid, stared straight ahead, while Mary Debenham's lips pressed into a thin line. Princess Dragomirov, her gnarled hands resting on her cane, met Poirot's gaze with an intensity that spoke of both defiance and resignation. "The Armstrong case," Poirot said, his voice softening, "is the heart of this matter. Daisy Armstrong, a child of innocence, was kidnapped and murdered by Cassetti, a man who evaded justice through wealth and cunning. Her death shattered a family and rippled outward, touching each of you in profound ways. You, Princess Dragomirov, were her godmother, bound to her by love and duty. You, Mrs. Hubbard, or rather Linda Arden, were her grandmother, a celebrated actress whose grief fueled a quest for retribution. Colonel Arbuthnot, you were a friend of her father, a man of honor who could not abide Cassetti's escape. Mary Debenham, you were governess to Daisy's cousins, your heart broken by the tragedy. And so it goes, each of you. From the conductor Pierre Michel to the valet Masterman, from the maid Hildegard Schmidt to the young Antonio Foscarelli, carried a wound from that terrible crime. The dining car was silent, save for the faint creak of the train as it shifted in the melting snow. Poirot's words were not accusations but a laying bare of truth, each revelation peeling back another layer of the passenger's carefully constructed facades. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes sweeping the room. I have constructed 2 solutions to this crime, Poirot said, his tone deliberate. The first is simple. A lone assassin, perhaps a stranger, boarded the train, killed Ratchet, and escaped into the night. This theory accounts for the locked compartment, the scream, and the minimal evidence left behind. It is neat, tidy, and acceptable to the authorities, but it is not the truth. A murmur rippled through the passengers, quickly stifled. Poirot raised a hand, commanding silence. The second solution is more complex, but it is the one that aligns with the evidence. The varied stab wounds, the collective alibis, the shared connections to the Armstrong family all point to a singular conclusion. You, all of you, conspired to murder Samuel Ratchet. Each of you delivered a stab, a collective act of retribution, for the death of Daisy Armstrong and the destruction of her family. This was not a crime of passion or greed, but one of calculated justice, executed with precision and unity. The passengers' reactions were a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, relief, fear, and defiance. Mrs. Hubbard's eyes brimmed with tears, while Princess Dragomirov nodded almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging a long-held secret. Mary Debenham reached for Colonel Arbuthnot's hand, their fingers intertwining in a silent pact. Pierre Michel, the conductor, bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. Poirot continued, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of empathy. I have spent many years seeking justice, upholding the law with the precision of my little gray cells. But here, on this snowbound train, I am faced with a different kind of justice, one born of love, loss, and moral conviction. You did not kill for personal gain, but to right a wrong that the law could not. Cassetti's escape mocked the memory of Daisy Armstrong, and you, together, ensured he would mock her no longer. He paused, his gaze lingering on each passenger. I have seen your hearts, he said softly. I have seen the pain that drove you to this act, and I am torn. The law demands that I report the truth, that I deliver you to the authorities for judgment. But my heart questions whether justice has not already been served. The dining car seemed to hold its breath. Monsieur Bouc leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Poirot, what will you do? Poirot's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability flickering across his face. I have made my decision, he said. I will present the simpler solution to the authorities. Lone assassin who vanished into the night. The evidence is ambiguous enough to support this theory, and the Yugoslav police, eager to clear the case, will accept it. You will be free to leave this train, to return to your lives, carrying the weight of what you have done. A collective exhale filled the room, a mixture of relief and disbelief. Mrs. Hubbard sobbed quietly, her hands covering her face. Princess Dragomirov inclined her head, a gesture of gratitude that carried the weight of her aristocratic dignity. Mary Debenham and Colonel Arbuthnot exchanged a look, their hands still clasped, while Pierre Michel wiped his eyes with a trembling hand. But know this, Poirot added, his voice firm once more. This decision does not absolve you. You have taken justice into your own hands, and that is a burden you will carry for the rest of your days. I ask only that you honor Daisy's memory, not with further vengeance, but with lives well lived. The passengers nodded, some tearfully, others stoically. The dining car, once a stage for deception, now felt like a confessional, its walls bearing witness to a pact sealed in silence. Poirot turned to Monsieur Bouc and Dr. Constantine. We will prepare a report for the authorities. The train will move soon, and this matter will be closed. As the passengers began to disperse, Poirot lingered, his gaze drifting to the window where the snow was melting, revealing patches of green beneath. The Orient Express, a symbol of elegance and adventure, had become a crucible for a moral dilemma that would linger in his mind long after he stepped off its platform. He adjusted his coat, his fingers brushing the silver watch in his pocket, a reminder of time's relentless march. The train's whistle sounded, sharp and clear, signaling its readiness to depart. Poirot made his way to the platform, the cold air biting at his face as he stepped onto the snow-dusted ground. The passengers followed, their faces a mixture of gratitude and solemnity, each carrying the weight of their shared secret. Poirot watched them go, his heart heavy but resolute. He had chosen compassion over law, a rare deviation from his usual path. Yet as he stood on the platform, the Orient Express pulling away into the distance, he felt a quiet satisfaction. The case was closed, the truth buried beneath the simpler lie he would tell. Daisy Armstrong's memory had been honored, not by the cold hand of legal justice but by the collective act of those who loved her. Poirot turned away, his footsteps crunching in the snow as he walked toward the station. The world awaited him, with its puzzles and its mysteries, but for now he was content. The Orient Express faded into the horizon, carrying its secrets with it, and Hercule Poirot, the little Belgian detective, walked on, ready for whatever lay ahead. The station was bustling, but Poirot moved through it with his usual calm precision, his mind already turning to the next challenge. He had faced the grayness of morality and emerged with a decision that felt right, if not perfect. As he boarded a carriage to take him to his next destination, he allowed himself a small smile. The Orient Express had been a journey unlike any other, and he would carry its lessons with him always. The carriage rolled away, and Poirot's thoughts drifted back to the dining car, to the faces of the passengers, to the weight of their choices. He had given them freedom, but not absolution. That, he knew, was theirs to seek in their own way. For now, the case was closed, and the world turned on, as it always did, and so Hercule Poirot left the Orient Express behind, a chapter of his life complete, its resolution as intricate and profound as the man himself.